Breaking news. New York City. Good evening. Tonight, one of America's most admired billionaires is making headlines for a reason no one expected. Just 6 months after announcing his engagement to socialite Isabella Monroe, billionaire real estate magnate Ethan Carter has abruptly postponed what many called the wedding of the year. But according to sources close to the family, it isn't money, it isn't scandal, and it isn't another woman. It's a silence that has lived inside his mansion for 4 long years. A silence left behind by the only woman he ever truly called home. Employees say Mr. Carter still sets 2 cups of coffee on Sunday mornings. Neighbors claim they've seen him sitting alone on the garden bench where his late wife used to read every sunrise. Friends insist he's moved on. His fiancée desperately wants to believe them. But every room in the mansion still whispers another woman's name. Tonight, we'll uncover the heartbreaking story behind the billionaire who had everything money could buy. Except the one thing he couldn't replace. Stay with us. Because what happened next changed not only his life, but the life of the woman who realized she wasn't competing with another woman. She was competing with grief itself, and grief never plays fair. Before we begin, welcome to Love Stories by Mr. Johnson, where every story reminds us that love isn't measured by wealth or grand gestures, but by the quiet choices we make when life tests our hearts. If stories about love, healing, forgiveness, and second chances speak to you, take a moment to subscribe, like this video, and let us know in the comments. Do you believe someone can truly love again after losing the love of their life? Your answer might change before this story ends. Now, let's begin where every ordinary day looked exactly the same, until one small habit revealed a heart that had never really stopped grieving. The first thing Ethan Carter did every Sunday morning was grind coffee beans. Not because he loved coffee, because she had. The stainless steel grinder hummed through the otherwise silent kitchen of his Manhattan penthouse, its familiar sound bouncing off marble countertops and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Hudson River. Outside, the city had already begun its ritual of impatient movement, yellow taxis weaving through traffic, joggers hugging the riverwalk, delivery trucks claiming loading zones before breakfast. Inside, time moved differently. Ethan measured exactly 4 tablespoons of coffee into the grinder. Not 3, not 5, 4. It had been 4 years since Claire died, yet his hands still remembered measurements his mind no longer questioned. He poured water into the kettle and waited. Steam slowly curled toward the ceiling. His eyes drifted to the shelf above the coffee maker. 2 ceramic mugs sat side by side. One navy blue, one cream-colored with tiny hand-painted wildflowers circling the rim. He reached for both, without thinking. The motion was effortless, practiced, almost unconscious. Only after pouring fresh coffee into each mug did reality quietly tap him on the shoulder. The cream-colored mug would remain untouched. Like every Sunday, he stared at it for a long moment, before letting out the same tired sigh he had carried for years. "You'd laugh at me," he whispered. No answer came. It never did. Still, he carried both cups toward the balcony. One for himself, one for someone who wasn't there. 4 years earlier, Claire had insisted breakfast always tasted better outdoors, even in cold weather. "You don't appreciate life from behind glass," she'd say, while wrapping herself in oversized sweaters that somehow made one of New York's most respected architects look like an ordinary woman borrowing time from a peaceful morning. She had never cared that Ethan was a billionaire. She cared whether he remembered to breathe, whether he answered his mother's phone calls, whether he took weekends off, whether he smiled without checking his watch. She had this strange ability to notice exhaustion before he admitted it existed. And somehow, she always knew when silence meant sadness instead of comfort. Ethan placed the untouched mug across from his chair. The chair remained empty, as always. He took one sip from his own coffee. It had already grown slightly bitter. Claire would have teased him. "Coffee waits for no one, Ethan." He almost smiled. Almost. Instead, he looked across the river, watching sunlight slowly paint the tops of distant buildings. His therapist once told him grief wasn't something you finished. It was something you learned to carry. At the time, Ethan hated that sentence. It sounded like surrender. Now, he understood. Some losses never became lighter. You simply became stronger, or better at pretending. His phone vibrated on the table. Isabella. He watched it ring. Stopped. Ring again. He finally answered. "Morning? You're awake." "I usually am by 6. "I know." Her voice carried the careful brightness of someone constantly checking emotional weather. "I was thinking maybe we could visit the vineyard this afternoon." He looked at the untouched coffee cup. "I have some work. It's Sunday." "I know." A pause. Not angry, not disappointed, just familiar. "You've said 'I know' 3 times this week. I didn't realize I was keeping score." I'm not keeping score either." Another silence. Neither of them rushed to fill it. Eventually she spoke softly. "Sometimes I wonder if you're talking to me, or someone you're remembering." Ethan closed his eyes. "I'll call you later." Ethan. Oh. But he had already ended the call. Not because he was upset. Because he didn't know how to answer her. Across town, Maya Brooks stood on a ladder inside the Harlem Community Arts Center, balancing a paint roller in one hand while trying to answer her ringing phone with the other. "Hold on," she muttered to herself. The roller slipped. A streak of pale blue paint landed across the protective tarp, instead of the wall. Perfect. She climbed down, laughing quietly at her own clumsiness before answering. "Morning, Grandma. You forgot breakfast again." "I had a banana." "A banana isn't breakfast. It counts if I eat it before 9. "No, sweetheart, that's called surviving." Maya laughed. "I'll come over after work." "You've been saying that for 3 Sundays." "I know." Her grandmother chuckled. "You always sound like your mother when you're avoiding rest." The smile on Maya's face softened. Her mother had been gone for 8 years. Cancer. Slow. Relentless. There were days when memories arrived like warm sunlight. Other days, they arrived like unexpected rain. "You still there?" her grandmother asked. "Yeah. I made peach cobbler." "I'll be there in an hour." "That's my girl." Maya slipped her phone into her pocket and looked around the nearly finished community library renovation. Fresh paint, new bookshelves, reading corners for children. The project barely paid enough to cover bills, but she loved watching forgotten places become useful again. Her friends often asked why she never chased bigger architectural firms. The answer was simple. Buildings mattered. People mattered more. She wanted children walking into beautiful spaces to believe they belonged there. Someone had once done that for her. She never forgot it. Later that afternoon, Ethan drove himself instead of using a chauffeur. It was one of the few habits Claire had convinced him never to abandon. "You think better when you're driving." She'd been right. He wasn't thinking today. He was remembering. The streets blurred together until traffic slowed near a neighborhood festival. Children laughed. Musicians played jazz beneath colorful tents. Artists displayed paintings across folding tables. Ethan almost turned around. Crowds exhausted him these days. Then he noticed a little boy crying beside an overturned easel. Paintings lay scattered across the sidewalk. People walked around them. Nobody stopped. Before Ethan realized what he was doing, he'd parked the car. He knelt beside the boy. "Need some help?" The boy nodded through tears. "My paintings." "They're okay." Together they picked up each canvas. A few frames were scratched. Nothing worse. "Oliver!" A woman's voice called from nearby. Maya hurried through the crowd carrying paper cups of lemonade. Oh my goodness. She reached them, dropping to one knee beside the child. "I'm so sorry. I turned away for 1 minute." Oliver wrapped his arms around her. "I'm okay." Maya looked up at Ethan. For a second, neither of them spoke. Not because of attraction. Because both recognized something familiar in the other's expression. Weariness. The kind that smiles couldn't hide. "Thank you," Maya said sincerely. "You didn't have to stop." Ethan glanced at Oliver. "I think someone once taught me that people are more important than schedules." She smiled. "A smart person. The smartest I've ever known." Something flickered across Maya's face. Not curiosity, recognition. She knew what it sounded like when someone spoke in the present tense about a person they had already lost. She didn't ask. She simply nodded. "I'm Maya." "Ethan." They shook hands. Briefly, politely. Then Oliver tugged Maya's sleeve. "Can we put the paintings back?" "Of course." Ethan handed over the last canvas. "Take care." "You too." He walked back toward his car. Neither of them looked back. Neither imagined that this quiet encounter, lasting less than 3 minutes, would become the first crack in the silence both had been carrying for years. Ethan didn't realize he had driven past his penthouse until his navigation system calmly announced, "You have arrived at your destination." He looked up. The underground parking entrance stood directly ahead. For a few seconds, he remained still, both hands resting on the steering wheel while the engine idled quietly. He wasn't thinking about the festival anymore. He was thinking about a woman whose name he had learned only minutes earlier. Maya. Not because she was beautiful. Though she certainly was. It was the way she'd looked at him. Most people saw the billionaire. Some saw opportunity. Others saw headlines. Maya had seen something entirely different. She had looked at him the way a nurse checks on a patient. Not with curiosity, not with pity, but with quiet awareness. As if she'd recognized a familiar kind of loneliness. He couldn't remember the last time a stranger had looked at him that way. The elevator climbed to the 56th floor. The doors opened onto the private foyer of his penthouse. Everything looked exactly as it had that morning. The artwork, The polished hardwood floors. The grand piano Claire had insisted on buying, despite neither of them knowing how to play. The silence. Especially the silence. He loosened his tie and walked into the kitchen. The cream-colored coffee mug still sat in the sink, half full, cold. He picked it up. His thumb traced the tiny painted wildflowers around its rim. Claire had bought the mug from a roadside pottery shop during a weekend trip through Vermont. He'd teased her for paying $25 for something they could have purchased in Manhattan for half the price. She'd laughed. "You're paying for someone's hands, Ethan, not the mug." Back then, he hadn't understood. Now, years later, he realized she had always noticed the people behind the things others overlooked. That was Claire. She collected stories, not possessions. A knock interrupted his thoughts. His housekeeper, Mrs. Delgado, stepped inside after he answered. She had worked for the Carter family for nearly 20 years, long enough to ignore formalities. "You forgot lunch." "I'm not hungry." She folded her arms. "You say that every Sunday." "I'm consistent." "You are stubborn." He smiled faintly. "You always take my side against myself." "Someone has to." Mrs. Delgado walked into the kitchen and quietly emptied the untouched coffee from Claire's mug before washing it. She never asked permission. She never commented. It had become their silent agreement. Every Sunday, every cup, every year. When she finished drying the mug, she placed it back beside the navy one, exactly where Ethan always left it. She looked toward him. "You went somewhere today." "I did." "You look different." He frowned. "I look tired." "No." She shook her head. "You look interrupted." The word caught him off guard. Interrupted. That was exactly how the afternoon had felt, as though something had gently stepped into the endless loop of his grief. Not enough to change it. Just enough to make him notice it. Before he could respond, his phone vibrated. Isabella. Again. Mrs. Delgado gave him a knowing glance. "You should answer." "Hi." "Finally." There was relief in Isabella's voice. "I was beginning to think you were avoiding me." "I'm sorry." "Were you working?" "No." "So, what were you doing?" He hesitated. "I went for a drive." "You hate driving on festival weekends." "I know." Another pause. "Ethan?" "Yes?" "Can I come over?" He looked around the apartment. The untouched piano. Claire's favorite books still lining the shelves. The framed photograph in the hallway that he kept meaning to move but never did. Of course. 30 minutes later, Isabella arrived, carrying 2 grocery bags. She was dressed casually in jeans and a cream sweater, her blonde hair pulled into a loose ponytail. Without asking, she walked straight into the kitchen. "I brought dinner." "You didn't have to." "I wanted to." She unpacked fresh vegetables, pasta, herbs, and a bottle of sparkling water. "You remembered I stopped drinking wine." "I remember everything you tell me." He wished he could say the same. Lately, conversations with Isabella blurred together. Not because she wasn't interesting, because his mind kept wandering into rooms that no longer existed. As they cooked together, Isabella spoke about wedding venues, guest lists, flowers, a charity gala, future travel. Ethan answered politely, but each response came a second too late. Eventually, she stopped chopping vegetables. "Ethan," he looked up. "Where are you?" "I'm right here." "No." Her voice remained calm. "You're physically here." She rested the knife on the cutting board, but emotionally. She searched for the right words. "You're somewhere I can't reach." He didn't deny it. That hurt her more than any argument could have. She leaned against the counter. "Do you know what scares me?" He stayed quiet. "I'm not afraid you'll stop loving me." He looked surprised. "I'm afraid you'll never actually start." The room fell silent. Not an angry silence, a tired one. The kind built from months of unanswered questions. "I've been trying," Ethan said softly. "I know." She nodded. "And that's what makes this so heartbreaking." Tears gathered in her eyes, though none fell. "You are one of the kindest men I've ever known. You deserve someone who wakes up excited to build a future with you." She swallowed. "I don't want to spend my life competing with memories." Ethan walked toward the window overlooking the city. "I never asked you to compete." "I know. You deserve better than this." She smiled sadly. "You keep saying what I deserve." She stepped beside him. "What do you deserve?" He didn't answer, because he genuinely didn't know. Across the city, Maya sat on the porch swing outside her grandmother Evelyn's house. The peach cobbler had disappeared quickly. So had the afternoon. Children rode bicycles down the sidewalk, while neighbors chatted across freshly cut lawns. It reminded Maya why she'd never left this neighborhood. Some places still remembered your name. Her grandmother handed her a glass of iced tea. "You've been unusually quiet." I met someone today. Her grandmother raised an eyebrow. Oh? It wasn't like that. Maya laughed. Just a stranger. But? He looked. She searched for the word. Lonely. Grandma Evelyn smiled gently. Lonely people recognize lonely people. Maya looked toward the street. I think he lost someone. You could tell? The way he spoke. She repeated his words. The smartest I've ever known. Present tense, not past. Her grandmother nodded knowingly. When you've loved deeply, grammar becomes complicated. Maya smiled. I've never heard it explained like that. Grief changes the way people speak. She squeezed Maya's hand. It also changes the way they listen. They sat together for several quiet minutes. Then Evelyn asked, Do you remember your mother planting those rose bushes? Maya looked toward the garden. They were tiny. You wanted to dig them up because they weren't blooming? Maya laughed. I was impatient. And what did your mother tell you? Maya's smile softened. Roots grow long before flowers appear. The words settled gently between them. Her grandmother nodded. That's true for people too. Sometimes healing happened where nobody could see it. That evening, Ethan stood alone in his study. The engagement ring catalogue Isabella had left on his desk remained unopened. Instead, he found himself staring at an old photograph tucked inside one of Claire's favorite books. The picture had been taken during their first apartment renovation. Claire wore paint-covered overalls and held a roller brush triumphantly toward the camera. On the back she'd written, Don't build houses, Ethan. Build homes. Homes remember love. He closed his eyes. For the first time in years, he cried. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly enough that no one else would have known. Except that somewhere else in the city, another person was also sitting in silence, remembering someone she loved. Neither Ethan nor Maya realized that life had already begun weaving their stories together, not through romance, but through shared understanding. And sometimes, understanding arrives long before love does. The tears came quietly, not because Ethan Carter had forgotten how to cry, because he had learned how to do it without making a sound. The photograph remained in his hands as he sat in Claire's favorite reading chair. Outside, Manhattan shimmered beneath thousands of lights, each apartment window holding a different story. Some families were eating dinner. Some couples were arguing over dishes. Some parents were reading bedtime stories. Life continued. It always had. It simply no longer included Claire. He turned the photograph over again. Don't build houses, Ethan. Build homes. Homes remember love. For years, he had believed the sentence was about architecture. Tonight, he realized it had never been about buildings. Across town, Maya unlocked the door to her apartment above a neighborhood bookstore. It wasn't large. A living room. A tiny kitchen. One bedroom. Shelves overflowing with novels, sketchbooks, and framed photographs covered nearly every wall. The apartment wasn't expensive. It was peaceful. She placed her keys inside a ceramic bowl her mother had made years before. One side had cracked after being dropped during a move. She never replaced it. Some things became more valuable after they broke. She had learned that from her grandmother. She changed into comfortable clothes and opened her laptop. Several emails waited from clients asking about renovation proposals. Another message came from the director of the Harlem Community Arts Center. Subject, thank you. The children's reading room looks incredible. You gave them more than fresh paint. You gave them dignity. Maya smiled. Her mother used to say, beautiful spaces remind people they're worth taking care of. That belief had guided every project Maya accepted. She wasn't interested in designing mansions. She wanted ordinary people to feel extraordinary when they walked through a door. Meanwhile, Isabella stood alone in Ethan's kitchen. Dinner had gone cold. The pasta sat untouched between them. She looked toward the hallway, where Ethan had disappeared nearly 20 minutes earlier. Mrs. Delgado quietly entered from the pantry. You should eat, the housekeeper said gently. I'm not hungry. Mrs. Delgado nodded. You love him. I do, and he cares about you. Isabella gave a tired smile. Caring and loving aren't always the same thing. Mrs. Delgado didn't answer immediately. She had watched Ethan grow from an ambitious young businessman into one of the country's most successful entrepreneurs. She had also watched him become a widower before his 40th birthday. Finally, she spoke. Grief can make good people unavailable. Isabella looked down. I don't know how long I'm supposed to wait. The older woman placed a comforting hand over hers. Only you can answer that. Ethan returned a few minutes later. His eyes were slightly red. Neither of them acknowledged it. Sometimes dignity meant pretending not to notice another person's pain until they were ready to speak about it. Isabella stood. I think I should go. I'll walk you downstairs. You don't have to. I want to. The elevator ride was almost silent. Before the doors opened, Isabella turned toward him. I need to ask you something. Okay. If Claire had lived. He closed his eyes. She immediately regretted asking. I'm sorry. No. He shook his head slowly. You deserve an honest answer. His voice barely rose above a whisper. If Claire had lived. Another pause. We never would have met. Neither of them spoke. The answer wasn't cruel. It was simply true. Truth often hurt more than lies. When Isabella drove away, she cried for the first time since accepting Ethan's proposal. Not because he had been dishonest, because he finally had been. She realized something heartbreaking. He wasn't choosing between two women. He was trying to become a man capable of loving again, and he hadn't reached that place yet. Monday morning arrived wrapped in grey clouds. Rain covered the streets before sunrise. Ethan left earlier than usual, hoping work would quiet his thoughts. It didn't. Every meeting felt longer. Every presentation sounded distant. During lunch, his assistant entered carrying a folder. The Carter Foundation Board approved your visit. He looked up. What visit? The Literacy Initiative. He remembered. Claire had established the Foundation's children's reading program during the first year of their marriage. After her death, Ethan had continued funding it. Not because he enjoyed charity events, because closing it felt like losing her all over again. When? This afternoon. He nodded. I'll go. The Harlem Community Arts Center buzzed with excitement. Teachers arranged chairs. Children decorated colorful bookmarks. Volunteers carried boxes of donated books into the newly renovated library. Maya checked the final decorations one last time. Everything looked ready. Almost. She noticed one bookshelf leaning slightly. Without hesitation, she grabbed her toolbox. If something isn't steady, her mother always said, neither is the person leaning on it. So Maya fixed small things before they became big problems. At exactly 2 o'clock, black SUVs pulled into the parking lot. Children rushed toward the windows. He's here. Who? The billionaire. Teachers laughed softly. To the children, famous visitors were more exciting than holidays. Ethan stepped from the vehicle wearing a navy suit without a tie. No cameras, no media, just a small security team. He preferred it that way. The center's director greeted him warmly. Mr. Carter, thank you for coming. The pleasure is mine. As they walked toward the library, Ethan stopped. Near the entrance stood a woman tightening screws on a bookshelf. Paint stained the sleeve of her denim jacket. A loose curl had escaped her ponytail. She looked up. Recognition spread slowly across both their faces. The festival. Maya smiled. The paintings. Neither laughed. They simply remembered. It felt surprisingly comfortable. I didn't know this was your project, Ethan said. I designed the renovation. He glanced around. It's beautiful. She looked toward children running between colorful reading corners. It belongs to them now. He nodded thoughtfully. Claire would have loved hearing someone say that. The director interrupted. Maya, Mr. Carter has funded this literacy program for years. She looked genuinely surprised. You did? Ethan shrugged modestly. My wife started it. The words came naturally. Not late wife. Not former wife. Simply, my wife. Maya noticed. She also noticed he wasn't ready to explain, so she didn't ask. Instead, she said, she must have believed books could change lives. A faint smile crossed Ethan's face. She believes stories teach people how to survive things they haven't experienced yet. For the first time in years, someone finished Claire's thought. My mom used to say almost the same thing, Maya replied. Stories let us borrow someone else's courage until we find our own. The hallway fell quiet. Neither realized the children had stopped talking nearby. The center director simply watched the two strangers speaking as though they had known each other for years. Not because they shared history, because they shared understanding. Later that afternoon, Ethan wandered alone through the children's library. Every wall carried colorful illustrations. Every chair invited conversation. Every corner felt warm, alive. He finally understood what Claire had meant years ago. Buildings didn't change lives. People did. As he turned to leave, he noticed a small handwritten sign taped beside the entrance. Every child deserves a place where their dreams feel welcome. No signature. He knew immediately who had written it. He looked back toward Maya across the room. She was helping a little girl choose her first chapter book. The child hugged the book to her chest, as if she'd been handed treasure. Ethan smiled, not because his grief had disappeared, because, for the first time in years, it had made room for something else. Hope. Just a little. Barely enough to notice. But enough. Before we continue, Take a moment to think about this. Do you believe it's possible to truly love someone new without letting go of the person you lost? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I read them all, and I'd love to hear your perspective. If this story is touching your heart so far, please like this video, subscribe to Love Stories by Mr. Johnson, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss the next chapter. Because Ethan and Maya have only just met, neither of them knows that one quiet conversation is about to change two lives shaped by grief, memory, and the courage to hope again. Now, let's continue with Chapter 2, The Rain Began Before Sunrise. Not the dramatic kind that rattled windows or flooded streets. Just a steady drizzle that blurred the edges of the city, making Manhattan appear softer than usual. Ethan Carter stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows of his office on the 62nd floor, watching tiny umbrellas drift through the sidewalks below like moving pieces on a chessboard. His assistant, Rachel, quietly entered with his morning schedule. You have the board meeting at 9, lunch with the investors at noon, and the foundation review at 3. Ethan nodded, without looking away from the window. Rachel hesitated. The Literacy Center sent a thank you letter. He finally turned. They did? Along with a few drawings from the children. She placed a large envelope on his desk before leaving. For nearly 10 minutes, Ethan ignored it. He answered emails, signed contracts, reviewed acquisition reports, yet his attention kept returning to the envelope. Finally, he opened it. Inside were dozens of crayon drawings. Some showed books, some showed smiling teachers. One drawing caught his eye. It showed a little girl sitting between two adults, reading beneath a large tree. Across the top, written in uneven handwriting, were the words, "Stories make families bigger." Ethan stared at the sentence. It wasn't grammatically perfect, but somehow, it carried more wisdom than many business books he'd read. His phone buzzed. It was Isabella. He answered after the second ring. "Good morning. I hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all." There was a brief silence before she spoke. "I've been thinking about our conversation." "So have I. I don't want us to keep pretending." Neither did he. "I think we both deserve honesty," she continued. "Not because we've failed, but because we've been trying to build something while one of us is still standing in yesterday." Ethan closed his eyes. "I'm sorry." "I know you are." She sighed softly. "I don't regret loving you, Ethan." His chest tightened. "But I don't want to become someone who waits for a version of you that isn't ready to exist." He understood. Perhaps for the first time, he truly understood. "I think we should postpone the engagement," she said gently. "Not cancel, not end. Simply give the truth room to breathe." "I agree." The words hurt, not because he was losing Isabella, because he realized she had been carrying the emotional weight for both of them. "I hope you find peace," she whispered. "I hope you do too." When the call ended, Ethan remained still. Sometimes love wasn't about holding on. Sometimes it was about refusing to ask someone else to carry your unfinished grief. Across Harlem, Maya unlocked the doors of the community library. Children would arrive after school for the weekly reading program. She switched on the lights one by one. The room slowly came alive. Bookshelves glowed beneath warm lighting. Bright rugs covered the reading corners. Tiny chairs waited patiently for curious minds. She smiled. Places like this reminded her that hope could be built with ordinary things. Paint, wood, books, kindness. As she arranged new arrivals on a display table, the center's director walked in carrying a newspaper. "You've become local news." Maya laughed. "I've done what?" The director pointed to a small article featuring photographs from yesterday's reopening. One picture showed children reading. Another captured Ethan speaking with volunteers. A third, taken without either of them noticing, showed Ethan and Maya standing beside the bookshelf talking. The headline read, "Community Project Unites Local Designer and Billionaire Philanthropist." Maya shook her head. "They make everything sound more exciting than it is." "Maybe." The director smiled. "Or maybe they notice something people often overlook." "What?" The way two strangers listened to each other. That afternoon, the library buzzed with laughter. A shy little boy named Caleb wandered through the shelves, holding a dinosaur book upside down. Maya knelt beside him. "Looking for something special?" He nodded. "My dad says reading is hard." "What do you think?" He shrugged. "I've never really tried." She gently turned the book around. "Then today seems like a good day to begin." He looked uncertain. "What if I'm bad at it?" Maya smiled warmly. "Everyone is bad at something before they learn it." The boy considered her words, then opened the first page. Nearby, a volunteer quietly smiled. Moments like these were why Maya never chased higher-paying jobs. Changing one child's confidence could echo through an entire lifetime. Later that evening, Ethan drove without a destination. It had become a habit after Claire's death. The city somehow made more sense when viewed through a windshield. Traffic eventually slowed near Riverside Park. He parked and stepped outside. Rain had stopped. The air smelled fresh. People walked dogs. Couples shared umbrellas. An elderly man played chess alone beneath a gazebo. Ethan wandered until he found a quiet bench overlooking the river. Claire had loved places where conversations didn't need to compete with noise. As he sat down, he noticed something carved into the wooden bench. Love remembers, life continues. The words seemed impossibly simple, yet they lingered. He wondered who had carved them. Someone grieving? Someone healing? Or someone who had learned both could exist together? On the other side of the park, Maya finished delivering donated books to a nearby school. She decided to walk home instead of taking the subway. Her grandmother always encouraged walking after emotionally busy days. It gives your heart time to catch up with your mind. As she entered the park, she noticed a familiar figure sitting alone on a bench. She almost kept walking. Then Ethan looked up. Recognition settled between them. Again, neither seemed surprised. "Mr. Carter." "Ethan," she smiled. "Ethan." He gestured toward the empty end of the bench. "Would you mind?" She hesitated only briefly before sitting. For nearly a minute, neither spoke. The silence felt comfortable, not awkward. Finally, Maya looked toward the river. "My grandmother says, silence tells you whether you're with the right person." Ethan glanced at her. What if the silence is sad? Then maybe it needs company instead of fixing. Those words stayed with him. No advice, no attempt to rescue him. Just quiet understanding. He hadn't realized how desperately he'd needed that. "I've been told I spend too much time remembering," he admitted. Maya watched the river drift by. "I don't think remembering is the problem." He looked at her. "I think believing you have to live there is." The breeze stirred the trees overhead. Ethan lowered his eyes. No one had ever challenged his grief so gently. No one had ever made healing sound less like betrayal. For the first time in years, he found himself wondering whether honoring Claire and embracing the future didn't have to be opposing choices. The thought frightened him. But it also gave him something he hadn't felt in a very long time. Possibility. And neither of them realized that this quiet conversation beside the river had just become the first real step toward a friendship neither had been looking for, but both desperately needed. Ethan remained on the park bench long after the evening breeze had turned cool. Neither he nor Maya seemed eager to interrupt the silence. For the first time in years, silence didn't feel like punishment. It felt like permission. Permission to stop pretending he had all the answers. Permission to admit that grief had become more than something he carried. It had quietly become the place where he lived. Maya finally stood. "I should get going." "So should I." Neither moved immediately. Instead, Maya smiled. "You know something?" "What?" "You apologize too much." Ethan laughed softly. "I've been told that before." "I'm sure you have." She slipped her hands into the pockets of her jacket. "You don't have to apologize every time you're sad." He looked at her thoughtfully. "I don't always know when I'm doing it." "That's because you've gotten used to making other people comfortable with your pain." Her words settled gently between them. "You don't owe anyone that." For a moment, Ethan simply watched the river. Claire used to tell him something similar. People who love you aren't asking you to perform strength. They're asking you to trust them with your weakness. He hadn't trusted anyone with it in years. "Thank you," he said quietly. Maya nodded. "Good night, Ethan." "Good night, Maya." As she walked away, Ethan realized something unusual. He wasn't replaying memories. He was paying attention to the present. It was a small difference, but it felt enormous. The following morning, Ethan arrived at Carter Holdings earlier than anyone else. The lobby buzzed with quiet efficiency as employees greeted one another over fresh coffee. Many admired him. Few truly knew him. He stepped into the executive elevator and caught his reflection in the mirrored wall. The expensive suit, the polished shoes, the confident posture. To everyone else, he looked like a man who had everything under control. Appearances had become one of his greatest talents. His assistant, Rachel, met him outside the boardroom. "There's one item I added to today's agenda." "What is it?" "The Literacy Foundation." He looked surprised. "It usually comes up during quarterly reviews." "I know," she smiled. "But after visiting the community center, I thought you'd want to discuss expanding it." He paused. For years, the foundation had simply continued Claire's work. He had maintained it, protected it, funded it, but he had never truly participated in it. Maybe that needed to change. "Move it to the beginning of the meeting." Rachel smiled. "I was hoping you'd say that." Meanwhile, Maya arrived at the community library carrying 2 large boxes of donated books. Caleb, the little boy who had been afraid of reading, ran toward her. "Miss Maya!" She laughed. Good morning. I finished my first book. You did? He nodded proudly. My dad read it with me. How did it feel? He grinned. I wasn't bad at reading. You never were. She knelt beside him. You were just new. Caleb thought about that. My teacher says practice changes people. Maya smiled. Your teacher is very wise. As Caleb hurried inside, another volunteer approached. You always know what to say. Maya shook her head. No. I just remember what someone once said to me. She often found herself repeating her mother's words without realizing it. The older she became, the more she understood that love echoed through generations. Sometimes we became the voice that once encouraged us. That afternoon, Ethan surprised his executive team. Instead of discussing profits first, he spoke about purpose. When my wife created the Carter Literacy Foundation, he began, she believed education wasn't charity. He paused. It was dignity. The room grew quiet. I've spent 4 years making sure her work continued. He looked around the table. But continuing something isn't the same as growing it. He slid a proposal across the table. I want to renovate 100 community libraries over the next 5 years. One executive looked stunned. 100? Ethan nodded. Books change children. He smiled faintly. And children change the future. No one argued, because for the first time in years, they weren't listening to a billionaire. They were listening to a husband determined to honor love by helping others. Late that afternoon, Ethan received an unexpected phone call. Mr. Carter? This is Ethan. Hello, this is Daniel Brooks. The last name sounded familiar. I hope I'm not disturbing you. Not at all. I'm the director of the Harlem Community Arts Center. Recognition settled in. We're hosting a volunteer planning session this Saturday. I remember. Maya mentioned you'd shown interest in expanding literacy spaces. Ethan smiled. She did? She thought you might enjoy seeing how these projects actually come together. For several seconds, Ethan didn't answer. He wasn't used to being invited somewhere simply because someone thought he might enjoy it. No publicity, no fundraising dinner, no cameras. Just people trying to improve their community. I'd like that. We'd be happy to have you. Across town, Maya sat on her grandmother's porch after dinner. The neighborhood glowed beneath golden streetlights. Children chased fireflies, while adults talked across front yards. Her grandmother handed her a warm mug of chamomile tea. You've been smiling more this week. Have the first? You have. Maya laughed. I guess work has been good. Her grandmother gave her a playful look. Only work? Maya knew exactly where this conversation was going. Grandma, I'm only asking. I met someone interesting. Oh? A friend. Her grandmother waited. He lost his wife. The older woman nodded slowly. And? I think he's forgotten that grief and gratitude can exist together. What do you mean? He feels guilty whenever life gives him a peaceful moment. Her grandmother looked toward the stars. That's common. It is. When someone loves deeply, happiness can feel like betrayal. Maya frowned. But it isn't. No. Her grandmother smiled gently. It's often the very thing the person we lost would have wanted. Those words stayed with Maya long after the conversation ended. Saturday arrived bright and clear. Ethan parked outside the community center wearing jeans and a simple navy sweater instead of his usual tailored suits. Volunteers carried lumber. Teenagers sorted donated books. Parents painted colorful murals. Nobody seemed impressed by his wealth. They were too busy working. Maya spotted him carrying a stack of folding chairs. You actually came. I said I would. She smiled. A lot of people say that. My wife hated broken promises. The words slipped out naturally. Instead of looking uncomfortable, Maya simply nodded. She sounds like someone who expected people to mean what they said. She did. Together they arranged tables for the afternoon workshop. Children laughed nearby as volunteers assembled reading corners. An elderly carpenter struggled with a heavy bookshelf. Without saying a word, Ethan walked over and helped him lift it. The carpenter smiled. Thank you. My pleasure. You've done this before? Ethan chuckled. Not very well. That's all right. The carpenter winked. Good work usually begins with awkward work. Maya overheard the conversation and smiled. It reminded her that wisdom rarely announced itself. Sometimes it sounded like ordinary people speaking ordinary truths. As the afternoon came to an end, the volunteers gathered for coffee and homemade cookies. Conversation filled the room. Laughter echoed from every corner. Ethan looked around. No one here knew the value of his company. No one cared. They knew him only as the man who had spent the afternoon carrying books, tightening shelves, and helping children unpack stories. And strangely, that felt like the most honest introduction he'd had in years. Maya walked over, holding 2 paper cups of coffee. She handed him one. He accepted it with a grateful smile. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. He looked around the room before answering. "I spent years believing healing meant leaving the past behind. And now?" He glanced at the children reading together on the new carpet. "Now I'm starting to think healing means carrying the past differently." Maya smiled. "I think your wife would be proud of that." For a brief moment, emotion filled Ethan's eyes. "So do I." Neither of them realized someone across the room had quietly noticed the way they understood one another without needing many words. And before the day was over, that quiet observation would set events in motion that neither of them could yet imagine. By Tuesday morning, the story had spread farther than Ethan expected. It wasn't front-page news, it wasn't scandal, but in the business section of nearly every major newspaper, one headline quietly circulated: "Billionaire Ethan Carter postpones wedding indefinitely." Speculation followed. Some blamed busy schedules, others hinted at disagreements over a prenuptial agreement. A few anonymous sources suggested the pressure of public life had simply become too much. No one guessed the truth. The greatest obstacle to Ethan's future wasn't another person. It was a conversation he had never finished having with his own heart. Rachel knocked gently on his office door. "You have 3 interviews requesting comments. I'm declining all of them. They're already writing stories. They're welcome to." She nodded. "I figured you'd say that." As she turned to leave, Ethan stopped her. "Rachel?" "Yes?" "How long have you worked here?" She smiled. "Almost 11 years. You knew Claire." "I did." He looked out toward the city. "Was I different?" Rachel didn't answer immediately. Instead, she walked over to the window beside him. "You worked just as hard." He waited. "But you laughed more." The words weren't meant to wound him. They simply carried the weight of observation. "Claire had this habit," Rachel continued. "She'd bring homemade cookies every Friday." Ethan smiled faintly. "They weren't very good." Rachel laughed. "They were terrible." For the first time in days, Ethan laughed with someone instead of politely smiling. The moment was brief, but real. Across Harlem, Maya stood inside the renovated reading room while children gathered for an afternoon story hour. The room buzzed with excitement. Caleb proudly carried a stack of beginner books. A little girl named Ava insisted on reading aloud despite stumbling over every third word. Nobody corrected her. They encouraged her. Confidence, Maya had learned, often grew faster than perfection. Her phone vibrated. The caller ID read, "Anderson and Lowe Architects." She stepped into the hallway before answering. "Hello, this is Maya. Ms. Brooks, we're pleased to officially offer you the position." She closed her eyes. The firm was one of the most respected architectural companies in New York. The salary was nearly 3 times what she currently earned. Full benefits, international projects, recognition, everything she'd worked for during graduate school. "We'd love to have your answer by Friday." "I appreciate the offer. We hope you'll accept." "So do I," she replied honestly. When the call ended, she remained standing in the quiet hallway. She should have been celebrating. Instead, she felt strangely unsettled. That evening, she carried the news to her grandmother. Evelyn listened patiently before asking only one question. "When you imagined your future as a little girl, what excited you most?" Maya smiled. "I wanted to design places where people felt safe." "And which job helps you do that?" "The community work." "And which job pays better?" "The firm." Her grandmother nodded. Those answers don't always point in the same direction. Maya looked down at her tea. "I'm afraid I'll disappoint someone no matter what I choose." Evelyn reached across the table. "My mother used to tell me something I'll never forget." "What was that?" "Success is measured by how many people know your name. Significance is measured by how many lives are better because you knew theirs." The words lingered in the room, long after they were spoken. Saturday's volunteer project brought Ethan back to the community center. This time, he arrived early. He wore faded jeans, work boots that had clearly never seen much work, and a plain grey sweatshirt. Several volunteers looked surprised. One teenager handed him a paint roller without recognizing him. "Can you help with that wall?" Ethan smiled. "Absolutely." For the next hour, he painted alongside teachers, parents, college students, and retirees. Nobody discussed stock prices. Nobody asked about billion-dollar acquisitions. Instead, they debated the best color for a reading corner. He found himself caring far more about that conversation than he expected. Maya spotted him balancing on a small ladder. "You're getting better." "I'm improving?" You only dripped paint twice. He looked down at his sweatshirt. I was hoping nobody noticed. Oh, everyone noticed. They laughed. It was easy, unexpectedly easy. Not because they were becoming close, because neither expected anything from the other beyond honesty. During lunch, volunteers gathered around folding tables. An elderly retired teacher named Mrs. Patterson sat beside Ethan. You remind me of my husband. Ethan looked surprised. Is that a compliment? It depends. She smiled warmly. He carried too much responsibility. I understand that. He also believed everyone else's needs came before his own. Ethan lowered his eyes. Mrs. Patterson gently broke her sandwich in half. You know what finally changed him? What? He realized exhausted people can't love well. Those words settled deeply. Claire had once said something almost identical. Rest isn't selfish, Ethan. It's how love survives. He hadn't listened then. Perhaps he was finally ready to now. Later that afternoon, Ethan and Maya organized donated books. They worked quietly, sliding novels and children's classics onto newly built shelves. Maya held up a worn copy of Charlotte's Web. My mother read this to me every summer. Ethan smiled. Claire loved that book. Really? She cried every single time. So did my mom. They looked at one another, not because of coincidence, because memory had become a language they both understood. I used to think remembering someone meant refusing to change, Ethan admitted. And now? I think changing might be one of the ways we honor them. Maya carefully placed the book on the shelf. I think love leaves instructions. He looked at her. We spend the rest of our lives learning how to read them. As the volunteers prepared to leave, Daniel Brooks approached Ethan. We're planning another literacy project next month. I'd like to help. Daniel smiled. I had a feeling you'd say that. Across the room, Maya watched Ethan kneel to help Caleb tie a loose shoelace before the little boy ran outside to meet his father. It was such an ordinary moment. No cameras, no applause, just quiet kindness. She realized something then. The richest thing about Ethan Carter wasn't his fortune. It was the gentleness that grief had nearly buried, but not destroyed. And for the first time since losing Claire, Ethan drove home with paint on his sleeves, sawdust on his boots, and the unmistakable feeling that tomorrow held something worth waking up for. Monday arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that made New York feel almost unhurried. Leaves drifted across the sidewalks outside Carter Holdings as employees hurried into the lobby with coffee cups and briefcases in hand. Ethan stood alone in his office, looking down at the city. For years, mornings had followed the same predictable rhythm. Review reports, approve acquisitions, answer emails, schedule meetings. Every day looked productive. Very few felt meaningful. His eyes drifted toward the framed photograph on the bookshelf behind his desk. Claire stood on the porch of the first literacy center they had funded together, smiling beneath a hand-painted banner that read, "Every child deserves a place to dream." He remembered complaining about the peeling paint on the building. Claire hadn't noticed the walls. She had noticed the children waiting outside with library cards in their hands. You always see what needs fixing, she had told him that day. I try, and I always try to see what's already beautiful. Back then, he'd smiled without understanding. Now, years later, he finally did. Rachel entered carrying a folder. You asked me to gather every proposal related to the Literacy Foundation. She placed the stack on his desk. There are more than I expected. Ethan looked at the folders. Good. She hesitated. Can I ask you something? He nodded. You've changed. He smiled faintly. I've heard that recently. It's not dramatic. She searched for the right words. You seem present. The observation stayed with him after she left. For years, people had described him as successful, disciplined, focused, and dependable. No one had ever called him present. Across Harlem, Maya sat across from the partners of Anderson and Lowe Architects. Glass walls overlooked Midtown. Architectural models filled the conference room. The firm's managing partner slid a portfolio toward her. We'd like you to lead community-centered projects. Maya looked surprised. I thought I'd be designing luxury developments. We certainly have those. He smiled. But after reviewing your work, we believe your greatest strength is designing spaces that bring people together. She appreciated the compliment. It was generous. It was sincere. Still, something inside her remained unsettled. As the meeting ended, the managing partner added one final sentence. Whatever you decide, don't choose based only on salary. She blinked. I'm sorry? I've spent 30 years watching talented architects chase bigger paychecks. He smiled kindly. The happiest ones usually chased the work that made them forget to check the time. Those words followed her all the way home. That Saturday, volunteers gathered once again at the community center. This time, they were transforming an unused storage room into a quiet reading space for teenagers. Unlike younger children, teenagers often needed somewhere to think more than somewhere to play. Ethan arrived carrying several flat-packed bookshelves in the back of his SUV. Daniel laughed. "I don't think I've ever seen someone deliver furniture in a vehicle worth more than my house." Ethan laughed with him. "I was afraid the delivery truck would be late. Or, maybe you're becoming one of us." "What does that mean?" Daniel tightened a bolt on one of the shelves. "The kind of people who stop asking whose job something is and simply help." Maya walked in moments later, carrying paint samples. She looked at Ethan's growing pile of tools. "I see you've upgraded from paint rollers." "I'm trying to become useful." "You already are." The words came naturally. Neither of them realized how much they meant. The afternoon passed quickly. Music played softly through a portable speaker. Teenagers helped paint murals. Parents assembled reading tables. At one point, Caleb tugged on Ethan's sleeve. "Mr. Ethan?" "Yeah, buddy?" "My dad says you're really rich." Several adults nearby chuckled. Ethan smiled. "Your dad isn't wrong." Caleb frowned thoughtfully. "Then why are you building shelves with us?" The room became unexpectedly quiet. Everyone waited for Ethan's answer. He looked around at the volunteers before kneeling so he was eye level with the boy. "Because some things are too important to pay someone else to care about." Caleb considered that for a long moment. Then he nodded, as though the answer made perfect sense. Nearby, Maya watched silently. Children had a way of asking questions adults avoided. Sometimes they also uncovered the truest answers. Later that afternoon, everyone gathered for lunch. Homemade casseroles, sandwiches, fresh fruit, and cookies covered folding tables. Mrs. Patterson, the retired teacher, sat beside Maya. "You've been smiling more lately." Maya laughed. "Is it that obvious?" "It usually is." Mrs. Patterson glanced across the room toward Ethan, who was helping two teenagers repair a broken chair. "He's smiling more too." Maya followed her gaze. "I think he's remembering how to live." Mrs. Patterson nodded. "Grief doesn't disappear." "No. It simply stops insisting on having the loudest voice." As the volunteers cleaned up, rain began falling outside. Most people waited beneath the covered entrance. Ethan and Maya stood near the doorway watching the storm. "I used to love rainy days," Ethan said. "Used to?" "Claire and I would cancel meetings just to drive without a destination." Maya smiled. "My mom loved thunderstorms." "Really?" She said rain reminded her that even the sky needed to let things go. For a while, they simply watched the rain. Then Ethan spoke quietly. "I was afraid that talking about Claire would make people uncomfortable. It probably does for some. And for you?" Maya looked out toward the wet parking lot. "I think love deserves to be remembered." She paused. "But I also think the people we lose would be heartbroken if remembering them became the reason we stopped living." Ethan lowered his eyes. "I've been wondering something." "What?" "If I ever love again." He struggled to finish the sentence. "Does that mean I loved Claire less than I thought?" Maya answered without hesitation. "No." He looked at her. "It means Claire taught you how to love so well that your heart never forgot." The words settled into a place inside him that had been aching for years. No therapist, no business advisor, no friend had ever explained it that way. He felt something loosen in his chest. Not grief, the guilt attached to it. That evening, Ethan returned to the penthouse, carrying a box of leftover children's books Daniel had insisted he take. He placed them on the dining table. The apartment was still quiet, still familiar, still filled with memories, but it no longer felt frozen. He walked to the balcony, carrying only one mug of coffee. He noticed the second mug still resting inside the cabinet. His hand reached toward it out of habit, then stopped. He smiled softly. "Not today, Claire." His voice carried neither sadness nor shame, only gratitude. "I think you'd understand." He stepped onto the balcony with a single cup. The silence remained, but somehow, it no longer felt empty. It felt peaceful. And hundreds of miles away from the noise of boardrooms and headlines, two lives continued moving toward one another. Not because either of them was searching for romance, but because healing had quietly taught them to recognize kindness when they found it. Neither Ethan nor Maya knew that the greatest test of their friendship was still waiting. It would arrive not through betrayal or misunderstanding, but through a choice that would ask each of them what kind of future they were truly willing to build. The first cold Saturday of November arrived with clear skies and a sharp breeze that painted Central Park in shades of gold and crimson. Ethan Carter stood in his closet longer than necessary. Rows of tailored Italian suits hung in perfect order. Dark gray, Navy. Black, the uniform of the man he had spent years becoming. Instead, he reached for an old flannel shirt, folded on the highest shelf. The fabric was faded at the elbows. Claire had bought it during a weekend trip to Vermont almost 6 years earlier. She had laughed when he questioned the purchase. "You own enough expensive clothes to impress strangers," she'd said. "Buy one that reminds you to be yourself." He smiled at the memory. For the first time, the smile stayed. It wasn't followed by guilt, only gratitude. He slipped the shirt on, grabbed his truck keys instead of calling his driver, and headed toward Harlem. The community center was already alive when he arrived. Parents carried donated books through the front entrance. Teenagers assembled desks. Children ran through the hallways, laughing despite repeated reminders not to. Someone had set up a portable speaker near the entrance, filling the building with soft jazz. Daniel waved from across the room. "You're early. I figured I'd finally earn my volunteer badge." Daniel laughed. "You've almost qualified." "Almost? You still haven't cleaned paintbrushes." Ethan placed a hand over his heart. "I didn't realize there was an initiation." "Oh, there is." Across the room, Maya stood on a ladder hanging framed artwork created by local elementary school students. She stepped down just as Ethan walked over. "You survived another week in corporate America." "Barely." She tilted her head. "Tough meetings?" He chuckled. "No." He looked around the room. "They just seem smaller lately." She understood exactly what he meant. Sometimes purpose quietly rearranged a person's priorities. Things that once felt enormous became surprisingly manageable. Before either of them could continue, Caleb raced toward them, holding a library card above his head. "I got my own card." Maya knelt first. "Congratulations." The little boy beamed. "I already checked out 2 books." Ethan crouched beside him. "Which ones?" "Charlotte's Web and one about astronauts." "That's a good combination." Caleb frowned thoughtfully. "Why?" "One teaches you about friendship. The other teaches you about possibility." Caleb considered that answer before grinning. "I'm going to read both." As he ran off, Maya smiled. "You've gotten good at talking to kids." "I think they're easier than adults. They're definitely more honest." The morning passed quickly. Volunteers sorted donations while others built reading tables. Near noon, Ethan found himself sanding rough edges from wooden bookshelves beside an elderly carpenter named Frank. Frank worked slowly, carefully. Every movement seemed intentional. After several quiet minutes, Frank spoke. "You ever notice people rush through things they'll live with for years?" Ethan glanced up. "What do you mean?" Frank ran his hand across the smooth wood. "They'll spend months choosing a car." He smiled. "But they'll spend 5 rushed minutes choosing the words that end a marriage, or start one." Ethan stopped sanding. Frank continued. "Wood teaches patience." "How?" "If you force it." He held up a cracked board. "It breaks." He picked up another. "If you work with its grain." The surface became smooth beneath the sandpaper. "It becomes stronger." Ethan quietly absorbed the lesson. He wondered how many relationships failed because people tried to force healing instead of allowing it. During lunch, volunteers gathered outside beneath colorful trees. Someone passed around homemade chili. Another volunteer distributed cornbread wrapped in kitchen towels. No one seemed concerned about titles or careers. Teachers sat beside business owners. Retirees laughed with college students. Everyone belonged. Ethan couldn't remember the last corporate luncheon that had felt this genuine. Mrs. Patterson sat beside him. "You've been happier." "I think so." "What's changed?" He looked across the lawn toward Maya, who was helping children collect fallen leaves for an art project. "I stopped asking how to erase the past. And I'm learning how to carry it." Mrs. Patterson smiled knowingly. "The strongest bridges aren't built by forgetting the river beneath them." Meanwhile, Maya received another phone call from Anderson and Lowe. She stepped away from the crowd before answering. "Hello? We're just checking in." "I appreciate that. We're hoping you've reached a decision." Maya looked back through the windows at the community center. Children were reading together on beanbags she had helped design. A teenager proudly showed his younger sister a bookshelf he had assembled that morning. She smiled. "I need a little more time." "Of course." After ending the call, she leaned against the brick wall. She wasn't confused. She simply understood that some decisions deserved patience. Her mother used to say, "A hurried decision often becomes a long regret." Later that afternoon, Ethan and Maya loaded empty donation boxes into the back of his truck. The work was almost finished. For several minutes, neither spoke. Finally, Ethan broke the silence. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why did you become an architect?" She rested another box inside the truck bed before answering. When I was 10, my elementary school library closed because the building wasn't safe. He listened. For almost 2 years, we didn't have a place to read after school. She smiled faintly. My mother used to take me across 3 bus routes every Saturday just so I could borrow books. That must have been difficult. It was. She looked toward the community center. But she never complained. What did she say? Maya laughed softly. She believed children shouldn't have to travel far to discover big dreams. The words stayed with Ethan. So, every project you take is my way of shortening the distance. He nodded slowly. It wasn't just architecture. It was love continuing its work through someone who had been loved well. As the afternoon came to an end, volunteers gathered for a group photograph outside the building. Children squeezed into the front row. Adults stood behind them. Someone handed Ethan a little girl who insisted she was too short to be seen. Everyone laughed. The camera clicked. In that frozen moment, Ethan wasn't a billionaire. He wasn't a widower. He wasn't a man whose engagement had become newspaper gossip. He was simply another volunteer surrounded by people trying to leave the world a little kinder than they had found it. When the picture was over, Maya walked over. You look different. I've heard that a lot lately. No. She smiled. I mean today. He looked down at the old flannel shirt. Oh, you finally wore something that looks comfortable. He laughed. My late wife picked it. Maya smiled warmly. She had good taste. Ethan looked down at the worn sleeves. She really did. For the first time, speaking about Claire no longer felt like reopening a wound. It felt like introducing a dear friend, and somewhere deep inside, a quiet realization began to take root. Healing wasn't asking him to leave Claire behind. It was inviting him to carry the best parts of her into every tomorrow he was still blessed to live. The following Wednesday began with an unexpected phone call. Maya was organizing donated books when her cell phone vibrated across the desk. Anderson and Lowe Architects. She closed the library office door before answering. Good morning, Maya Brooks speaking. Good morning, Miss Brooks. This is Thomas Anderson. His voice carried the calm confidence of someone accustomed to making life-changing decisions. I hope we're not catching you at a bad time. Not at all. We wanted to let you know that we'd like to keep the position open for 1 more week. Maya was surprised. I appreciate that. We believe you'd be an incredible addition to our firm. He paused before continuing. But we also believe important decisions shouldn't be rushed. After the call ended, Maya remained standing beside the window. Outside, children hurried towards school carrying backpacks nearly as large as they were. She remembered being one of them. Her mother had walked her to school every morning, no matter how tired she was. Never choose a road just because everyone else says it's the best one, her mother would say. Choose the one you'll still be proud of when nobody is watching. Back then, Maya hadn't understood. Now, she was living the question her mother had prepared her for years ago. Across Manhattan, Ethan sat through another board meeting. Charts covered the conference room screen. Revenue projections, expansion plans, investment opportunities. The presentation was flawless. Yet, halfway through, Ethan realized something unusual. For the first time in years, success alone no longer felt like enough. When the meeting ended, the directors slowly filed out. Only Richard Collins remained behind. Richard had served on Carter Holdings' board since Ethan's father was alive. You've been distracted, Richard observed. I've been thinking. That's usually more dangerous. Ethan smiled. I spent years believing I honored Claire by keeping everything exactly as she left it. And now? I think she would have been disappointed. Richard leaned back. Why? Because she married a man who believed in building things. He looked out at the skyline. I stopped building. Richard nodded thoughtfully. Grief has a strange way of convincing us that standing still is loyalty. The sentence lingered long after the older man left. That Saturday, volunteers gathered for another community project. This time, they were transforming an abandoned courtyard into an outdoor reading garden. Parents planted flowers, while teenagers assembled wooden benches. Children painted colorful signs with their favorite book quotes. Ethan arrived carrying gardening gloves. Daniel laughed. I never imagined I'd see a billionaire buying mulch. I got a discount. Everyone laughed. It was becoming easier for Ethan to laugh. Not because life hurt less. Because he was allowing joy to exist beside the hurt. Maya handed him a small shovel. Your assignment. He examined it dramatically. I was hoping for something more executive. This is executive. Really? She pointed toward a patch of freshly turned soil. You'll be supervising those flowers. He smiled. I think I can handle that. Together, they spent the next hour planting lavender around the edges of the reading garden. The work was slow, peaceful. Occasionally, they spoke. Often, they didn't. Neither felt pressured to fill every quiet moment. Around lunchtime, a black sedan pulled into the parking lot. Several volunteers looked toward the entrance. A woman stepped out, wearing a simple navy coat. It was Isabella. She carried 2 large boxes. Daniel walked over to greet her. "You must be Isabella." She smiled politely. "I brought children's books from a fundraiser." "That's incredibly generous. I heard the center could use them." As she carried the boxes inside, her eyes met Ethan's. For a brief moment, neither moved. Then Ethan walked over. "I didn't know you were coming." "I almost didn't." She smiled gently. "But I remembered how much Claire cared about literacy." There was no bitterness in her voice, only sincerity. "I thought she'd want the books here." Ethan felt a lump rise in his throat. "Thank you." She glanced around the busy courtyard. Children laughed, while volunteers worked together. Then she noticed Maya helping Caleb paint a wooden sign. "So, that's Maya." Ethan looked surprised. "You know her name?" "I've heard Daniel mention the architect who's been changing this place." She studied Maya for only a moment before smiling. "She seems kind." "She is." Isabella looked back at Ethan. "You smile differently when you're here." He hadn't realized that. "I do?" "You used to smile because people expected you to." She looked toward the garden. "Now it looks like you forgot anyone was watching." Those words touched him more deeply than she knew. A little later, Maya introduced herself. "It's nice to finally meet you." "You too." The 2 women shook hands warmly. There was no tension, no competition, only mutual respect. Maya thanked Isabella for the donated books. Isabella smiled. "I didn't bring them." "You didn't?" "I asked friends to donate instead of bringing me birthday gifts." Maya looked genuinely impressed. "That's a beautiful idea." Isabella shrugged modestly. "I figured stories last longer than flowers." The 3 of them spent several minutes arranging books on temporary shelves. Watching them together, Mrs. Patterson quietly whispered to Daniel, "That's what emotional maturity looks like." He nodded. "Nobody is trying to win. They're trying to do what's right." Later that afternoon, Isabella prepared to leave. Before getting into her car, she turned back to Ethan. "Would you walk with me?" They strolled slowly toward the parking lot. "I owe you something," she said. "You don't owe me anything. I owe you honesty." He waited. "When you postponed the engagement." She smiled softly. "I thought I had failed." "You didn't. I know that now." She looked toward the reading garden where volunteers continued planting flowers. "I finally realized I wasn't losing to another woman." Ethan lowered his eyes. "I was losing to grief." She gently shook her head. "No. You weren't choosing grief. You were learning how to survive it." He looked at her with quiet gratitude. "I hope someday." She paused. "You stop apologizing for still loving Claire." A tear escaped before she could stop it. "And I hope when the time comes, you don't apologize for loving someone else too." She hugged him. It wasn't a romantic embrace. It was the kind shared by 2 people grateful they had chosen honesty over resentment. When she drove away, Ethan remained standing in the parking lot for several moments. Not because he was saying goodbye to a relationship, because he had just witnessed what grace looked like. As the sun began to set, volunteers admired the completed reading garden. Children raced toward the benches carrying books they couldn't wait to open. Lavender swayed gently in the evening breeze. Wooden signs displayed hand-painted messages about imagination, courage, and hope. Maya stood beside Ethan. "I think they'll love it." "They already do." A little girl sat beneath a newly planted maple tree reading aloud to her younger brother. Neither child noticed the adults watching. They were completely absorbed in the story. Ethan smiled. "I used to think changing the world required enormous moments." Maya folded her arms. "And now? I think it happens like this." He nodded toward the children. "One bookshelf. One conversation. One child. One ordinary Saturday." Maya smiled. "My grandmother says extraordinary lives are usually built from ordinary days repeated with love." Ethan looked at the families filling the garden. For the first time since Claire's death, he didn't feel caught between the past and the future. He simply felt present. And sometimes, being fully present was the bravest step a grieving heart could take. The first snowfall of December transformed the city overnight. By morning, rooftops shimmered beneath a blanket of white, and every branch in Riverside Park seemed to carry its own quiet miracle. Children rushed through the streets bundled in colorful scarves, eager to leave footprints in fresh snow before anyone else could. Ethan Carter arrived at the reading garden just after sunrise. The benches were dusted with snow. The maple tree stood motionless, its bare branches reaching toward a pale blue sky. He brushed the snow from one of the benches and sat down. For years, winter had been the season he dreaded most. It reminded him of hospital windows, of whispered conversations, of the December morning when doctors had gently told him there was nothing more they could do for Claire. Every year afterward, he survived winter rather than lived through it. This year felt different. The memories remained, but they no longer trapped him inside them. He closed his eyes and whispered softly, "I still miss you." The words drifted into the cold air. For the first time, they weren't followed by unbearable silence. Instead, they were answered by the joyful laughter of children arriving at the library. Life had continued, not because Claire had been forgotten, because love had left behind something worth continuing. Inside the library, Maya was arranging donated books when she noticed Ethan standing quietly near the entrance. "You got here early." "I wanted a few minutes with the garden." She smiled. "I figured you might." She handed him a steaming cup of coffee. "I remembered how you take it." He looked surprised. "You remembered? You always add one packet of sugar but never finish the last few sips." Ethan laughed. "I didn't realize anyone noticed. The little things usually tell us the most." He looked at the coffee for a moment. Claire used to know those little things too. Instead of feeling guilty for remembering, he simply smiled. Some memories didn't compete with the present. They quietly accompanied it. That afternoon, the library hosted its annual holiday reading day. Families filled every corner of the building. Teenagers volunteered to read picture books aloud. Parents wrapped gifts. Grandparents shared stories from their childhoods. The building buzzed with warmth despite the cold outside. Daniel approached Ethan carrying a clipboard. "We've got a problem." Ethan looked concerned. "What happened?" "We expected 70 children. And 140 signed up." Ethan blinked. "That's a wonderful problem." "It is. But we're short on books." Without hesitation, Ethan reached for his phone. "How many do we need?" Daniel hesitated. "Probably another 200. "Done. You haven't even asked the price." Ethan smiled. "I've spent enough years counting money." He looked around at the excited children. "I'd rather start counting opportunities." Daniel shook his head, laughing. "You've changed." "I hope so." Across the room, Maya watched the exchange. Mrs. Patterson joined her. "You're smiling." "Am the first?" "You've been smiling all morning." Maya lowered her eyes. "I think I'm watching someone become himself again." Mrs. Patterson nodded knowingly. "That's one of the greatest privileges in life." "What is?" "Seeing healing happen before the person notices it themselves." Later, Caleb tugged gently on Ethan's sleeve. "Mr. Ethan?" "Yes?" "I wrote another story. You've been busy, but this one doesn't have an ending." Ethan knelt beside him. "Why not?" Caleb shrugged. "I don't know how it should end." Ethan looked at the unfinished pages. Then he smiled. "Maybe that's because you're still living it." Caleb frowned thoughtfully. "So, I don't have to know everything yet?" "No." Ethan gently closed the notebook. "Most of us don't." The little boy grinned. "That's good." "Why?" "Because grown-ups always pretend they know." Ethan laughed so loudly that several volunteers turned toward them. "You've got us figured out." As evening approached, volunteers lit small lanterns around the reading garden. Soft golden light reflected against the snow. Children gathered beneath the maple tree for one final story before going home. Mrs. Patterson invited Maya to read. Instead, Maya looked toward Ethan. "Would you?" He looked startled. "Me? I think they would like it. I haven't read aloud since—" He stopped. "Since Claire." Maya understood without him finishing the sentence. "You don't have to." He stared at the children, waiting expectantly. Then he slowly accepted the book. He opened to the first page. His voice trembled at first, only slightly. As the story continued, his confidence grew. The children listened with complete attention. Every laugh, every surprise, every exciting moment. They responded exactly as Claire always had whenever Ethan read to her on quiet Sunday evenings. When he reached the final page, the children erupted into applause. Caleb raised his hand. "Can you read again next Saturday?" Ethan smiled. "I'd like that." It was a simple promise, yet it felt enormous, because it wasn't a promise made to Caleb alone. It was a promise to himself, to keep showing up, to keep living. The event ended shortly after sunset. Volunteers packed away decorations while families headed home carrying stacks of books. Snowflakes drifted lazily beneath the streetlights. Ethan and Maya remained behind to lock the library. Neither seemed in a hurry to leave. "You were wonderful with the children," Maya said. "I was terrified. They couldn't tell. They reminded me of Claire." Maya looked at him gently. Did that make it harder? He considered the question. No. A slow smile crossed his face. It made it feel like she was cheering me on. Maya's eyes softened. I think she'd be proud of you. Ethan looked up at the softly falling snow. For the first time. He paused. I think she'd be proud, because I'm finally allowing myself to be happy. Maya reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a folded envelope. I was going to wait. For what? She handed it to him. I made a decision today. Ethan opened it carefully. It was a letter from Anderson and Lowe Architects. Across the top, in bold letters, were the words, Offer declined. He looked up in surprise. You turned it down? I did. Because of the library? Not just the library. She smiled. Because I finally understood something. What? My dream was never to work for the biggest company. She glanced around the reading garden they had helped build together. My dream was to build places where people remember they're not alone. A peaceful silence settled between them. Neither reached for the other's hand. Neither rushed the moment. Some connections didn't need dramatic declarations. They simply grew stronger each time two people chose the same values. As they stepped out into the snowy evening, Ethan looked back one last time at the library glowing warmly against the winter sky. For years, he had believed grief was the final chapter of his story. Now, standing beside Maya, surrounded by a community built through kindness, he understood something Claire had known all along. The most meaningful stories are not the ones without heartbreak. They are the ones where love teaches people how to begin again. What a beautiful reminder that healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means finding the courage to live again while carrying love in your heart. Now we want to hear from you. Do you believe it's possible to truly love someone again without betraying the memory of the person you lost? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your story or perspective might be exactly what someone else needs to read today. If this chapter touched your heart, please like this video, subscribe to Love Stories by Mr. Johnson, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss the next chapter of this unforgettable journey. In Chapter 6, Ethan and Maya's growing connection will face its biggest test yet, as an unexpected visitor from Claire's past uncovers a truth that could change everything they thought they knew. Until then, remember, sometimes the bravest thing we can do is believe that after every ending, life still has another beautiful chapter waiting to be written. The Monday after the holiday book drive arrived, wrapped in grey skies and a steady winter rain. The reading garden stood quiet. Tiny drops of water clung to the bare branches of the maple tree, while the colourful signs the children had painted glistened beneath the overcast morning. Inside the library, Maya unlocked the front doors just before 8. She paused for a moment, listening. There was something comforting about an empty library. The silence wasn't lonely. It was full of possibility. Within an hour, children would fill the rooms with laughter. Parents would browse the shelves. Volunteers would return to their familiar routines. Every day the building came alive because ordinary people chose to care. As she switched on the lights, her phone buzzed. It was Daniel. Maya, can you come to the conference room? Is everything okay? I think so. His voice carried an unusual seriousness. But someone is here, asking for Ethan. Across town, Ethan was finishing breakfast when Mrs. Delgado placed a neatly addressed envelope beside his coffee. It was delivered by hand. He looked at the elegant handwriting on the front. Mr. Ethan Carter, no return address. He opened it carefully. Inside was a single folded note. If you truly want to honor Claire's legacy, meet me at the Riverside Library at 10 this morning. There are things you deserve to know. No signature, no explanation. He read the note again. Then a third time. His heartbeat quickened. Who could possibly know something about Claire that he didn't? At exactly 10 o'clock, Ethan stepped through the library doors. Maya noticed him immediately. You look worried. He showed her the note. She read it silently. Do you recognize the handwriting? No. Before either of them could say another word, Daniel appeared. He's waiting in the conference room. Who is? I'm not sure. He only said he knew Claire. Ethan exchanged a glance with Maya before walking toward the hallway. Each step felt heavier than the last. The conference room door stood slightly open. Inside sat a man in his late 60s. Silver hair, wire-rimmed glasses. A weathered leather briefcase rested beside his chair. He rose as Ethan entered. Mr. Carter, you know who I am? I do. And you are? The man extended his hand. My name is Samuel Whitmore. Ethan shook it cautiously. I worked with Claire. Ethan frowned. She never mentioned a Samuel Whitmore. Samuel smiled sadly. She wouldn't have. The work we did together wasn't public. Those words instantly filled the room with tension. Ethan remained standing. What kind of work? Samuel looked toward Maya and Daniel. "I'd prefer to explain this privately." Maya started to leave. Ethan gently stopped her. "She stays." Samuel studied Maya for a moment before nodding. "Very well." He slowly opened his briefcase. Inside were several worn notebooks tied together with a faded blue ribbon. Ethan's breath caught. He recognized the ribbon immediately. Claire had tied birthday gifts with that exact shade of blue. "Where did you get those?" "They belong to Claire." Samuel carefully untied the ribbon and placed the first notebook on the table. "I met Claire nearly 6 years before she passed away." Ethan searched his memory. He had never heard that name. "She volunteered with a literacy outreach program every Thursday evening." "I know she volunteered." Samuel nodded. "What you didn't know is that she was quietly planning something much larger." He opened the notebook. Every page was covered in Claire's handwriting. Sketches, lists, maps, ideas. On one page, Ethan saw a sentence written in bold ink. "No child should have to travel miles to discover the joy of reading." His eyes filled with tears. "She wrote this." "Yes." Samuel smiled. "Almost 8 years ago." Maya leaned closer. The notebook contained drawings of community libraries, outdoor reading spaces, mobile book vans, and neighborhood learning centers. Some of the sketches looked remarkably similar to the projects Maya herself had designed. Samuel continued. "Claire believed literacy could transform entire neighborhoods. She wanted libraries to become places where people found hope, not just books." Ethan slowly turned another page. There were handwritten notes beside photographs of abandoned buildings, plans for renovation, ideas for volunteer programs, even fundraising strategies. "Why didn't she tell me?" Samuel answered gently. "Because she wanted to surprise you." Ethan looked up. "What do you mean?" "The day after your 10th wedding anniversary." Samuel smiled warmly. "She planned to show you everything." His voice softened. "She hoped the two of you would spend the rest of your lives building these centers together." Silence settled over the room. Rain tapped softly against the windows. For several moments, no one spoke. Finally, Maya broke the silence. "These plans." She carefully flipped through another notebook. "They're extraordinary." Samuel nodded. "Claire spent years developing them." He looked directly at Ethan. "But after she became ill." His voice grew quiet. "She asked me to keep them until I believed you were ready." Ethan stared at him. "Why now?" Samuel smiled. "Because I visited your reading garden last week." "You did?" "I watched you reading to children." He glanced toward Maya. "I watched this community come alive." Then he looked back at Ethan. "For the first time, I saw a man who wasn't simply surviving the loss of his wife. I saw a man becoming the person she always believed he could be." Ethan lowered his eyes. Tears slipped silently onto the pages of Claire's notebook. He carefully closed it and rested both hands on the cover. For years he had searched for one final message from Claire. He never imagined it would arrive not as a goodbye, but as an unfinished dream waiting for someone brave enough to complete it. For several moments, no one moved. The rain outside softened into a gentle drizzle, tapping lightly against the conference room windows as though the city itself had grown quiet out of respect. Ethan rested both hands on Claire's notebook. The worn leather cover felt familiar, even though he had never seen it before. Somehow, he knew that every page carried a piece of the future Claire had imagined, a future she had never lived long enough to see. Samuel reached into his briefcase one final time. "There is something else." He carefully removed a cream-colored envelope. Unlike the notebooks, this one had remained sealed. Across the front, written in Claire's unmistakable handwriting, were 7 simple words. "For Ethan, when he's ready to begin again." Ethan's breathing caught. His fingers trembled as he accepted the envelope. "You never opened it?" he asked quietly. Samuel shook his head. "I gave Claire my word." He smiled gently. "Some promises become easier with time." He paused. This one became more important. Maya stepped back without saying a word, giving Ethan the privacy the moment deserved. Very carefully, he broke the seal. Inside was a single handwritten letter. He unfolded it slowly. "My dearest Ethan, if you're reading this, then Samuel finally believed you were ready." A tear slipped down Ethan's cheek before he reached the next line. "Knowing you, you probably spent years wondering whether there was something more you could have done. Please stop asking yourself that question. You gave me more love than I ever thought one lifetime could hold." Ethan closed his eyes for a moment. The guilt he had carried for years stirred inside him. How many nights had he replayed hospital conversations? How many mornings had he wondered if another doctor, another treatment, another decision could have changed everything? Claire seemed to answer every question he had never spoken aloud. "Life isn't measured by how long we stay. It's measured by how deeply we love while we're here. His vision blurred again. He continued reading. There's something I need you to understand. The libraries were never meant to become monuments to me. They were meant to become places where children discover that their own stories matter. Promise me you won't build them because you miss me. Build them because the world still needs kindness. Maya quietly wiped away a tear of her own. Samuel looked toward the window, allowing Ethan the dignity of experiencing the moment without interruption. The final page felt heavier than the rest. Ethan took a slow breath before reading. One day, someone may walk beside you again. If that day comes, don't turn away because of me. Love doesn't replace love. It grows. The heart was never designed to hold only one season. If someone helps you laugh again, thank them instead of feeling guilty. If someone reminds you that tomorrow can still be beautiful, let them. That wouldn't be the end of our story. It would be proof that love kept teaching you long after I was gone. The room fell silent. Not the silence of emptiness. The silence of truth settling gently into wounded hearts. Ethan folded the letter with extraordinary care. He pressed it against his chest, not because he wanted to hold on to the past, because he finally understood the gift Claire had left behind. She hadn't asked him to remember her forever. She had asked him to keep living. After several minutes, Samuel spoke softly. She wrote that letter 3 weeks before she passed. Ethan looked up. She knew? Samuel nodded. I believe she did. His voice remained calm. She wasn't afraid for herself. He smiled sadly. She was afraid you'd stop living after she was gone. A quiet laugh escaped Ethan. She knew me too well. She loved you too well. Maya gently opened another notebook. Inside were detailed sketches of reading gardens, mobile libraries, community centers, and after-school mentoring programs. One page stopped her immediately. At the top, Claire had written, "Dream big enough that others can help finish it." Beneath those words was a map of neighborhoods across New York. Several locations had already been marked. Others remained blank, as though Claire had intentionally left space for someone else to continue drawing. Maya looked toward Ethan. She wasn't planning one library. No, Samuel smiled. She was planning a movement. Ethan slowly stood. He looked at every sketch spread across the conference table. For years, Carter Holdings had built luxury hotels, corporate towers, and commercial developments across the country. They were impressive, profitable, admired. Yet none of them suddenly felt as meaningful as the hand-drawn sketches before him. He turned toward Maya. I need your help. She looked surprised. My help? You see possibilities where other people see empty buildings. He smiled. Claire believed places could change lives. So do you. Maya looked down at the notebooks. I've spent my career hoping someone would believe community spaces matter. Ethan answered without hesitation. They matter. He extended his hand across the table. Will you help me build what Claire started? Maya looked at his hand, then at the sketches. Finally, she smiled. Not for the company, not for the headlines. She reached out and shook his hand. For the children who don't know yet how much they're capable of. Their handshake was simple. No grand announcement, no dramatic music, just two people choosing the same purpose. As they left the conference room together, the rain had stopped. A shaft of afternoon sunlight broke through the clouds and spilled across the reading garden outside. Children were already gathering beneath the maple tree, each carrying a different book. Ethan watched them through the window. For years he had believed grief was the final chapter of his life. Now he realized it had been the turning page. The next chapter would not erase the love he had shared with Claire. It would honor it by giving hope to people she would never have the chance to meet. And as he stepped into the library once more, surrounded by books, laughter, and the quiet determination of people who cared, Ethan understood something he had never truly believed before. The greatest legacy a person can leave behind is not what they own. It is the lives they inspire others to build. The city had barely awakened when Ethan Carter unlocked the door to his study. Morning light filtered through the tall windows, falling across the notebooks Samuel Whitmore had entrusted to him only days before. The leather covers were worn from years of careful handling. Inside them lived Claire's dreams. Ethan poured himself a cup of coffee and opened the first notebook to a page he had marked the night before. Across the top, in Claire's elegant handwriting, were the words, "Communities don't become stronger because of buildings. They become stronger because people believe they belong inside them." He read the sentence twice, then a third time. For years he had measured success by quarterly reports, acquisitions, and expansion plans. Claire had measured it by something entirely different. Belonging. He looked toward the framed photograph on his desk. Claire was smiling into the camera, a book tucked beneath one arm, her hair dancing in the wind. You were always building something bigger than I could see, he whispered. Mrs. Delgado knocked softly before entering. Good morning, Mr. Carter. Morning. You've been in here every day this week. I know. She smiled warmly. Mrs. Carter would have liked that. He looked up. Why do you say that? Because she always believed the quietest mornings produced the biggest decisions. Ethan smiled. She really did say that. Mrs. Delgado placed a fresh folder on the desk. The board members have confirmed today's meeting. He nodded. Thank you. After she left, Ethan closed Claire's notebook. Today's meeting would determine whether her dream remained ink on paper or became something the entire city could see. By mid-morning, the executive boardroom at Carter Foundation was filled. The room overlooked Manhattan's skyline. Its polished oak table had hosted discussions worth billions of dollars. Today, Ethan hoped it would host something far more valuable. Around the table sat 12 board members. Richard Collins offered Ethan an encouraging nod. Across from him sat Margaret Holloway, the Foundation's chief financial officer. Beside her was Victor Reynolds, a longtime trustee known for questioning every major investment. Maya entered quietly with a portfolio tucked beneath her arm. Several members looked at her curiously. Ethan stood. Thank you all for coming on such short notice. He waited until the room settled. I've asked you here because I'd like to propose the most important initiative this foundation has ever undertaken. Margaret folded her hands. We're listening. Ethan placed one of Claire's notebooks on the table. This belonged to my late wife. The room fell silent. Many of you knew Claire through our charitable work. A few heads nodded. What most of us didn't know was that she spent years designing a citywide literacy initiative. He opened the notebook. She envisioned transforming abandoned buildings into community learning centers, creating mobile libraries, funding scholarships, and building reading gardens in neighborhoods that have long been overlooked. Victor adjusted his glasses. Ambitious. It is. Ethan met his gaze. And necessary. He invited Maya to the front of the room. She connected her tablet to the large display. The first image appeared. It showed a neglected brick warehouse. The next slide revealed the same building transformed into a vibrant community learning center, filled with books, classrooms, gardens, and gathering spaces. The board members leaned forward. This renovation uses existing infrastructure, Maya explained. We preserve as much of the original structure as possible, reducing costs while maintaining the character of each neighborhood. She clicked to the next slide. A former fire station, then an unused school, then an abandoned community hall, each transformed into welcoming spaces designed for children and families. Our goal isn't simply to renovate buildings, Maya continued. It's to create places where people feel seen. Richard smiled quietly. That sentence sounded very much like Claire. Victor spoke first. The designs are impressive. He folded his arms. But this would require a substantial investment. Margaret nodded. Initial projections? Ethan slid a document across the table. The first phase includes 5 learning centers over 3 years. Margaret reviewed the figures. Her eyebrows rose. This exceeds our current education budget. It does. Victor looked directly at Ethan. So, where do you intend to find the money? Ethan answered calmly. By changing our priorities. The room became noticeably quieter. I propose reallocating funds from several commercial grant programs that have shown limited long-term impact. Victor frowned. Those programs generate significant visibility. They generate headlines, Ethan replied. I'm interested in generating opportunity. A murmur spread around the table. One trustee leaned forward. You're asking us to replace established programs with an idea that has never been tested. Ethan nodded. I'm asking you to invest in people instead of publicity. Margaret remained thoughtful. And if it fails? Ethan didn't answer immediately. He looked around the room before speaking. Every meaningful investment carries risk. He rested a hand on Claire's notebook. But the greatest risk is knowing we could change lives and deciding not to try. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Richard cleared his throat. When I was 11 years old, he began, my family lost our home. Several people looked at him in surprise. I spent nearly every afternoon in a public library. He smiled faintly. The librarian there knew my name. He paused. She also knew I was hungry. The room remained silent. She never embarrassed me. She simply handed me a book with a sandwich tucked inside. Richard looked toward Maya's designs. I became the first person in my family to attend college. He folded his hands. And I often wonder whether it began with a sandwich, or with the fact that someone believed I belonged there. No one interrupted. Stories had a way of reaching places numbers never could. When the meeting adjourned for lunch, Ethan and Maya stepped onto the terrace overlooking the city. Snow rested lightly on nearby rooftops. You handled that well, Maya said. I thought I was losing them. You stopped trying to persuade them. He looked at her. You simply told the truth. Ethan laughed softly. A few months ago I would have led with charts. And today? Today, I led with purpose. Maya smiled. I think that's why they listened. Before Ethan could answer, his phone vibrated. The screen displayed Samuel Whitmore's name. He answered immediately. Samuel? I've been organizing the remaining notebooks. Did you find something? A brief silence followed. I found another sealed page. Ethan's heartbeat quickened. What does it say? Samuel's voice carried equal parts wonder and caution. Across the front, Claire wrote only one sentence. He paused. Open when the first learning center is ready. Ethan looked out across the city skyline. For the first time, Claire's dream no longer felt like a memory. It felt like a promise waiting to be fulfilled. Snow continued to fall long after Ethan ended the call with Samuel. He remained standing on the terrace overlooking Manhattan, watching thousands of tiny white flakes drift between the towering buildings. Only a few months earlier, he would have admired the skyline. Today, he found himself thinking about neighborhoods hidden beyond it, places where children walked past abandoned buildings every day without imagining what those buildings could become. Maya joined him, wrapping her coat tighter against the cold. You've been quiet. Ethan smiled faintly. I'm trying to imagine what Claire saw. And? I think she looked at empty places and saw people instead. Maya nodded. That's what good architects try to do. She glanced toward the city. We don't really build walls. We build possibilities. Her words lingered in the winter air. The following morning, Carter Foundation's executive offices buzzed with activity. News of Ethan's proposal had spread quickly. Some employees were excited. Others were skeptical. Margaret Holloway entered Ethan's office carrying a stack of reports. I spent most of the night reviewing the numbers. Ethan looked up from Claire's notebooks. And? She placed the reports on his desk. If we restructure several long-term investments and partner with local organizations instead of managing everything ourselves. She pointed to a highlighted section. The first learning center is financially possible. Ethan leaned forward. Without cutting our existing scholarship programs? She nodded. It'll require discipline. But yes. A smile crossed Ethan's face. Thank you. Margaret returned the smile. I haven't agreed to all of it. No? I'm agreeing to give the idea a chance. He laughed softly. I'll take that. Meanwhile, Maya stood inside an abandoned brick school on the east side of the city. Daniel walked beside her, his footsteps echoing across the empty hallway. Broken windows let shafts of pale winter sunlight spill onto dusty wooden floors. The building had been closed for nearly 12 years. Yet Maya didn't see decay. She saw classrooms filled with children, reading circles, community workshops, music drifting through restored hallways. Daniel watched her studying the space. What are you thinking? She smiled. This building still wants to be useful. He chuckled. Only an architect would say that. She ran her hand across an old brick wall. Buildings remember why they were built. Sometimes they just need people to remember too. Later that afternoon, Ethan arrived carrying copies of Claire's sketches. He stood quietly in the middle of the old gymnasium. It's bigger than I expected. Maya nodded. So is the responsibility. She spread several drawings across a folding table. We can preserve most of the original structure. She pointed toward the high windows. Natural light belongs here. Then toward the former cafeteria. This could become a family reading cafe. Finally, she unfolded Claire's original concept sketch. Ethan stared at it. The layout Maya had imagined matched Claire's vision almost perfectly. Neither woman had ever met. Yet somehow, they had dreamed the same dream. It feels like they're working together, Ethan whispered. Maya looked at the sketch. I've been thinking the same thing. That evening, Samuel visited the site for the first time. He walked slowly through the building, pausing in nearly every room. Finally, he stopped in what had once been the school's library. He smiled. Claire would have loved this room. Ethan looked around. How can you tell? Because it faces east. Samuel pointed toward the tall windows. She always said morning light makes people believe the day can still surprise them. Ethan laughed quietly. She really noticed everything. Samuel nodded. The world gave Claire details. She gave them meaning. As the three of them stood together, a voice echoed from the entrance. Excuse me? An elderly woman stepped cautiously inside. She carried a grocery bag in one hand. I heard someone was looking at this old place. Maya greeted her warmly. We're hoping to restore it. The woman's eyes widened. My children went to school here. She smiled at the faded hallway. My granddaughter never got the chance. Ethan invited her inside. She slowly walked from room to room, sharing memories of school plays, science fairs, and teachers who had changed lives. Before leaving, she reached into her grocery bag. I don't have much. She removed a small envelope. It's only $43. Ethan immediately shook his head. You don't have to. She gently interrupted him. I know. She placed the envelope on the old library desk. But if this place is going to teach children again. Her eyes glistened. I'd like to say, I helped lay the first stone. After she left, no one spoke for several moments. The envelope seemed far more valuable than its contents. Samuel finally smiled. That's how movements begin. Not with millions. With one person deciding to believe. A week later, the Carter Foundation reconvened. This time, Ethan didn't begin with spreadsheets. Instead, he placed the elderly woman's envelope in the center of the boardroom table. The trustees looked at it curiously. This, Ethan said, is our first donation. Margaret frowned. $43? Ethan nodded. It came from a woman whose children once attended the school we're hoping to restore. He looked around the room. She said she wanted to help lay the first stone. Silence settled across the table. No graphs, no projections, just one simple act of generosity. Richard broke the silence first. If she's willing to invest her savings. He smiled. I think we can invest our confidence. One by one, heads began to nod. Not everyone was convinced. But for the first time, the proposal no longer felt like Ethan's dream. It was becoming everyone's responsibility. As the meeting came to a close, Margaret slid a folder across the table. The preliminary approval has passed. Ethan stared at her. You mean? The Carter Foundation is officially moving forward with the first learning center. A quiet wave of relief filled the room. Ethan closed his eyes for a brief moment. Somewhere, he imagined Claire smiling, not because her dream had finally begun, but because so many hearts had chosen to build it together. The announcement spread faster than anyone at the Carter Foundation expected. By Monday morning, local newspapers carried a small story about an abandoned public school that would soon become the city's first community learning center. It wasn't front-page news. There were no dramatic headlines. Just a photograph of the weathered brick building beneath a simple caption. Historic East Side School, to become community learning center. Ethan clipped the article from the newspaper and placed it inside Claire's notebook. Not because it marked a victory, because it marked a beginning. The old school no longer felt abandoned. Electricians inspected the wiring. Engineers measured support beams. Volunteers swept years of dust from classrooms that had sat silent for more than a decade. Every room echoed with possibility. Maya walked through the main hallway wearing a yellow safety helmet and carrying rolled blueprints beneath one arm. Daniel caught up with her. I've never seen this place so alive. She smiled. Buildings know when they're being given another chance. Daniel laughed. You really believe that, don't you? I do. She ran her fingers across the faded brick wall. People leave pieces of themselves in places they love. Sometimes all we do is uncover them. Ethan arrived carrying coffee for the construction crew. Several workers looked surprised. You didn't have to bring this yourself, one foreman said. I know. Ethan handed him a cup. But I wanted to. Within minutes, he was helping move donated books into a temporary storage room. His expensive coat was soon covered in dust. Mrs. Patterson smiled from across the hallway. You're getting better at looking like a volunteer. Ethan grinned. I'm still working on it. You already are one. The words stayed with him for the rest of the morning. Near noon, Samuel Whitmore arrived carrying a weathered cardboard box. I found these while cleaning Claire's storage unit. Inside were framed photographs, children reading beneath trees, community festivals, tiny libraries tucked inside laundromats and bus stations. Maya studied each picture carefully. These are from all over the country. Samuel nodded. Claire traveled whenever she found a community trying something creative. She believed good ideas deserved to be shared. One photograph stopped Ethan in his tracks. Claire stood beside a little girl holding a brand new library card. Written on the back in Claire's handwriting were the words, "Every first library card is a passport to a bigger world." Ethan smiled through quiet emotion. She never stopped collecting hope. Later that afternoon, Margaret Holloway arrived unexpectedly. She walked through the building slowly, taking notes. At first, Ethan assumed she was reviewing budgets. Instead, she paused in what would soon become the children's reading room. This space is smaller than I imagined. It is, Maya admitted. Margaret looked toward the tall windows. But it feels... She searched for the right word. Welcoming. Maya nodded. That's more important than impressive. Margaret smiled. I think I'm beginning to understand why Claire believed so strongly in this. She closed her notebook. Numbers explain cost. She glanced around the room. They don't explain value. Outside, neighborhood residents had begun stopping to watch the renovation. Some asked questions. Others simply smiled as workers carried fresh lumber through the front entrance. An elderly man approached Ethan. I learned to read in this building. Ethan shook his hand. Then I hope you'll come back when we reopen. The man looked toward the front doors. I will. He paused. And I'll bring my grandson. Ethan imagined a child walking through those same doors decades after his grandfather had done the same. Suddenly, Claire's sketches no longer felt like architectural plans. They felt like bridges connecting generations. As the sun began to set, the volunteers gathered in the future reading garden behind the school. Nothing had been planted yet. Only bare earth stretched across the yard. Maya knelt and pressed a small wooden stake into the ground. What is that? Ethan asked. She smiled. The center of the garden. He looked around. It doesn't look like much. Not yet. She stood and handed him a folded sheet of paper. It was Claire's original sketch of the garden. A maple tree stood at the center, surrounded by curved benches, flower beds, and winding paths lined with bookshelves protected beneath covered walkways. Ethan looked from the sketch to the empty ground. It's hard to imagine. Maya smiled. Every meaningful place begins as empty space. She pointed toward the single stake. This is where people decide to believe before they can see. Ethan looked across the quiet yard. Months ago, he had believed grief had emptied his future. Now he understood something different. Sometimes life clears the ground not to leave us with nothing, but to make room for something new to grow. Far behind them, unnoticed by the volunteers, a young reporter lowered her camera after taking several photographs of the renovation. She smiled to herself. This wasn't just the story of a billionaire honoring his late wife. It was becoming the story of an entire city choosing hope together. 3 weeks later, the construction site no longer resembled the forgotten building it had once been. Fresh windows reflected the morning sun. The old brick walls had been carefully restored instead of replaced. Inside, the echo of empty hallways had given way to the sounds of hammers, laughter, and volunteers, unpacking thousands of donated books. Every day seemed to add another piece to Claire's dream. Every day reminded Ethan that hope was something people built together. One afternoon, Maya stood in the future children's reading room with a tape measure around her neck. She adjusted the placement of several bookshelves before stepping back. Daniel looked around. You've changed this room at least 6 times. She smiled. 7. He laughed. What's wrong with the 6th version? It was beautiful. And? It wasn't welcoming enough. Daniel raised an eyebrow. There's a difference? Maya nodded. Beautiful rooms impress people. She looked around the unfinished space. Welcoming rooms invite them to stay. Daniel smiled. I think Claire would have liked working with you. Maya lowered her eyes for a moment. I hope she would have. Across town, the article published by the young reporter had spread far beyond the city. Letters began arriving at the Carter Foundation every day. Some contained checks. Others contained children's drawings. Many simply shared stories. Mrs. Delgado walked into Ethan's office, carrying another overflowing box. More mail. Ethan smiled. Every day? Twice a day now. He opened the first envelope. It contained $5 taped to a handwritten note. I'm 12 years old. I saved this from my allowance because I think every kid deserves a place to read. Ethan sat quietly. The next envelope came from a retired teacher. Another from a father who had learned English through public library books. Another from a woman who wrote that reading had helped her survive the loneliness of losing her husband. Each letter carried a different story. Each arrived with the same message. Keep going. That weekend, volunteers gathered for what they called Community Build Day. Families arrived carrying paintbrushes, flower seedlings, folding chairs, and homemade lunches. Children painted colorful murals that celebrated imagination, kindness, and learning. Neighbors who had never spoken before worked side by side. An elderly carpenter taught teenagers how to restore old wooden benches. A local bakery delivered pastries before sunrise. No one had been asked. People simply wanted to help. Standing near the entrance, Ethan watched the crowd with quiet amazement. Richard joined him. You know what surprises me? What? No one talks about you anymore. Ethan looked confused. Richard smiled. They talk about the center. He gestured toward the volunteers. That's how you know a mission has become bigger than the person who started it. Ethan looked across the courtyard. For the first time in years, he felt no desire to be recognized. Watching others take ownership of Claire's dream was more rewarding than any award he had ever received. As the afternoon wore on, Maya found Ethan sitting alone beneath the large maple tree that had finally been planted at the center of the reading garden. Its branches were still young. Its roots had only just settled into the earth. She handed him 2 cups of coffee. "I figured you'd forget to take a break." He smiled. "You know me too well." She sat beside him. For several minutes, neither of them spoke. Children laughed nearby as they arranged painted stones along the winding garden path. Finally, Ethan broke the silence. "I used to think healing meant reaching a day when I didn't miss Claire anymore." Maya listened without interrupting. "I know now, that day will never come." She nodded gently. "And that's okay." He looked toward the tree. "I don't love her less. I've just learned to carry the love differently." Maya smiled. "I think that's what she wanted." Ethan turned to her. "And what about you?" She hesitated before answering. "I've spent most of my life believing I had to choose between building a career and building a life." "And now?" She watched Caleb helping younger children paint a mural. "I think I'm finally discovering they're supposed to grow together." Late that evening, Samuel arrived carrying a small wooden box. "I've been waiting for the right time." He handed it to Ethan. Inside rested a silver key tied with a faded blue ribbon. Attached was one final handwritten tag from Claire. It read, "For the day this place belongs to the children." Ethan looked at Samuel. "What does it open?" Samuel smiled. "I honestly don't know. Claire never told me. But she insisted it would make sense when the time came." Ethan closed the box carefully. Another mystery, another reminder that Claire's story still had chapters left to reveal. The following morning, workers carefully lifted the permanent wooden sign above the restored front entrance. Everyone paused to watch. As bolts were tightened into place, the protective covering was removed. For the first time, the name became visible. Claire Carter, Community Learning Center. A hush fell across the crowd. Several volunteers quietly wiped away tears. Maya looked toward Ethan. He couldn't speak. He simply smiled through grateful eyes. This wasn't a monument to loss. It was proof that one life, lived with compassion, could continue changing the world long after it was gone. As applause echoed through the courtyard, the young reporter quietly raised her camera once more. She knew she wasn't documenting the end of a project. She was witnessing the beginning of a legacy. Spring arrived with clear skies and warm sunlight. After months of planning, rebuilding, fundraising, and countless volunteer hours, the Claire Carter Community Learning Center stood ready. Fresh flowers bordered the front walkway. Colorful banners created by neighborhood children fluttered in the breeze. The restored brick building looked nothing like the forgotten school it had once been. It felt alive. Inside, every bookshelf had been filled. Every classroom had been prepared. The reading garden bloomed beneath the young maple tree, whose leaves now danced gently in the morning wind. Today, the doors would finally open. Long before the ceremony began, families gathered outside the entrance. Children held balloons and handmade bookmarks. Parents took photographs beneath the new sign. Former students of the old school returned, eager to see the building where they had once learned their alphabet decades earlier. Among them was the elderly woman who had donated $43 months before. She wore her finest blue dress. When Ethan spotted her, he walked over immediately. "I've been hoping you'd come." She smiled warmly. "I wouldn't have missed this day for anything." Ethan reached into his jacket pocket. "I have something for you." He handed her a framed certificate. At the bottom were the words, "First Community Donor." Tears filled her eyes. "I only gave $43. Ethan gently shook his head. "No. You gave us permission to believe that ordinary people could build extraordinary things." The woman embraced him without saying another word. Backstage, volunteers hurried to make final preparations. Mrs. Delgado carefully arranged flowers near the podium. Margaret reviewed the day's schedule one last time. Richard greeted local officials and community leaders as they arrived. Meanwhile, Maya walked slowly through the empty reading room. Sunlight poured through the tall windows exactly as she had imagined months earlier. Children's artwork decorated the walls. Bright rugs covered the polished wooden floor. Comfortable chairs surrounded low bookshelves filled with stories from every culture. She smiled quietly. The room no longer belonged to blueprints. It belonged to children she had not even met yet. Outside, reporters began setting up their cameras. The young journalist who had followed the project from the beginning adjusted her microphone. Her editor approached. "You've covered this story for months." She nodded. "What makes it different?" The reporter watched neighborhood volunteers laughing together while arranging chairs. "It stopped being about a billionaire a long time ago." She smiled. "It's about what happens when one person's dream becomes everyone else's responsibility." Her editor lowered his notebook. "That's the story." Just before the ceremony began, Ethan slipped away unnoticed. He walked alone into the reading garden. The maple tree had grown taller. Birds chirped softly among its branches. He stopped beside a simple bronze bench engraved with Claire's favorite words. "Stories help us become who we're meant to be." He sat quietly. "I wish you could see this," he whispered. A gentle breeze moved through the garden. For a moment, everything became still. He remembered the nights after Claire's passing when silence had felt unbearable. Now, silence felt peaceful. Not empty. Peaceful. He smiled toward the sky. "Thank you. Not for leaving. For teaching him how to keep loving after loss." "Ethan?" He turned. Maya stood a few steps away. "I figured I'd find you here." He smiled. "I needed a minute." She sat beside him. So did I. For a while they simply watched volunteers welcoming guests through the front gates. Finally, Maya spoke. "Do you ever wonder what Claire would say if she were here?" Ethan laughed softly. "I think she'd tell us to stop hiding in the garden and go welcome our guests." Maya laughed with him. "That sounds exactly right." They stood together. Neither reached for the other's hand. They didn't need to. The quiet understanding between them had grown stronger than words. As noon approached, more than 500 people filled the courtyard. Children sat cross-legged in the front rows. Teachers, librarians, business owners, volunteers and families crowded every available seat. Local musicians played softly, while neighbors greeted one another like old friends. The atmosphere felt less like a ribbon-cutting ceremony, and more like a family reunion. Margaret stepped to the microphone. "Good afternoon, everyone." The crowd applauded. Several months ago, this building stood empty. She looked toward the restored school. Today, it stands as proof that communities can accomplish remarkable things when they choose hope over indifference. She welcomed local officials before inviting Ethan to the stage. As Ethan approached the podium, the applause grew louder. He looked across hundreds of smiling faces, then toward the volunteers, standing proudly along the sides. Finally, he saw Maya near the front row. She nodded once. "Take your time." He unfolded a small sheet of paper. After looking at it for only a second, he folded it again. He didn't need notes. Not today. He looked out at the crowd and smiled. "I came here planning to tell you how this dream began." He paused. "But looking at all of you." His eyes moved across the families, volunteers, children, and neighbors. "I realize this dream no longer belongs to one person." The crowd grew completely silent. "It belongs to every child who will walk through these doors believing their future can be bigger than their circumstances." Applause erupted before he could continue. Some dreams begin with a single voice. The greatest ones become a chorus. The applause continued, long after Ethan stepped away from the podium. He hadn't delivered the longest speech of the afternoon. He hadn't used polished corporate language or impressive statistics. He had simply spoken from the heart. And somehow, that was exactly what the community needed. As the applause faded, Margaret returned to the microphone. "Before we officially open the center," she announced, "there is someone we'd like to recognize." She turned toward the front row. "Maya Brooks, would you please join us on stage?" Maya looked startled. She glanced at Ethan, who smiled but offered no explanation. Slowly, she walked to the podium. Margaret handed her a small wooden plaque. Engraved across the front were the words, "For building more than walls, thank you for giving our community a place to belong." For a moment, Maya couldn't speak. She had accepted architectural awards before. She had received praise from clients and industry leaders. But this was different. Looking into the crowd, she saw children waving at her, parents applauding, construction workers cheering. The recognition wasn't for a building. It was for helping people feel at home. Fighting back tears, she leaned toward the microphone. "I've designed many buildings," she began softly, "but this is the first one that has changed me while I was helping build it." The audience responded with warm applause. She looked toward Ethan. "Thank you for trusting me with Claire's dream." Then she looked at the families gathered before her. "And thank you for making it your own." The master of ceremonies stepped forward, carrying a pair of oversized ceremonial scissors. A bright blue ribbon stretched across the entrance of the learning center. Several children were invited to stand beside Ethan and Maya. "So," the host said with a smile, "who should cut the ribbon?" Everyone looked toward Ethan. He shook his head. "Not me." He turned to the elderly woman who had made the very first donation. "Would you do us the honor?" The crowd erupted into applause. The woman covered her mouth in surprise. "I've never even held ceremonial scissors." Ethan laughed. "Neither have I." Together with 5 neighborhood children, she stepped to the ribbon. The children counted loudly. 3, 2, 1. The scissors closed. The ribbon fluttered gently to the ground. Cheers filled the courtyard. Children rushed through the doors with wide eyes, laughing as they explored the colorful reading rooms. Parents followed more slowly, taking in every detail. For the first time in over a decade, the old school echoed with joyful voices once again. Inside the building, Ethan wandered quietly from room to room. A little girl sat curled into a reading chair, completely absorbed in a picture book. Nearby, two brothers excitedly compared adventure novels. In another classroom, volunteers helped parents register for free literacy classes. Everywhere he looked, Claire's vision had come to life. As he entered the reading garden, he noticed Caleb sitting beneath the maple tree. The young boy was writing carefully in a notebook. "What are you working on?" Ethan asked. Caleb smiled. "My first story. Can I hear the title?" The boy proudly held up the page. The man who built a library because someone he loved taught him how. Ethan felt his throat tighten. "It's a good title." Caleb grinned. "I think so too." He looked around the garden. "When I grow up..." He hesitated. "I want to build places like this." Ethan placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Then promise me something." "What?" "When you do." "Build even more than we did." Caleb nodded with complete confidence. "I will." As evening settled over the city, the celebrations slowly came to an end. Volunteers stacked chairs. Families drifted home carrying books tucked beneath their arms. The center grew quiet again. Ethan and Maya remained behind. They walked through the empty halls one last time before locking the doors. Stopping in front of the entrance, Maya looked back at the brightly lit building. "Do you know what I realized today?" Ethan smiled. "What?" "We finished building the center." She paused. "But the real story begins tomorrow." He nodded. "Tomorrow, children will read here. They'll learn here. They'll dream here. And someday..." He looked toward the maple tree visible through the front window. "Some of them will come back to build something even greater." Just as they were preparing to leave, Samuel approached carrying the small wooden box Claire had left behind. "I think today's the day," he said quietly. Ethan looked at the silver key inside. The note said to open it when this place belonged to the children. Samuel smiled. "I'd say it does." Together, they searched the building. Finally, behind a bookshelf in the original library, they discovered a small wooden cabinet hidden inside the restored wall. The silver key fit perfectly. Inside rested a single envelope. Across the front, in Claire's familiar handwriting, were the words, "For Ethan, when your heart has finally found its way home." Ethan stared at the envelope in silence. He didn't open it. Not yet. Some gifts deserved to be received in quiet. He slipped the letter carefully into his jacket pocket. Then he looked once more at the joyful building around him. Months earlier, he had believed his story had ended with loss. Now he understood something Claire had known all along. The most beautiful chapters often begin after the pages we never wanted to turn. The celebration ended, but the Claire Carter Community Learning Center never truly became quiet again. Each morning, children hurried through its front doors with backpacks bouncing against their shoulders. Parents lingered in the lobby over fresh coffee. Retirees volunteered to tutor students after school. Authors donated books. College students mentored teenagers, preparing for scholarships. The building Claire had once imagined on the pages of a notebook had become exactly what she had hoped. Not a monument, a living place where hope could grow. 3 months passed. The Learning Center had already welcomed thousands of visitors. Every classroom remained full. The reading garden had become the neighborhood's favorite gathering place. Even the young maple tree had begun to stretch confidently toward the summer sky. One afternoon, Ethan stood on the second-floor balcony overlooking the main library. Children filled every corner. Some curled up in oversized chairs with novels. Others worked together on science projects. A little boy proudly sounded out difficult words, while his older sister quietly encouraged him. Ethan smiled. Richard stepped beside him. "You've been standing here for 10 minutes. "I know. What are you thinking about?" Ethan watched the children below. "I spent years believing success meant building taller buildings." He paused. "I've never built anything that mattered this much." Richard nodded. "Neither did Claire." Ethan looked at him. Richard smiled. "She never thought she was building libraries. She believed she was building futures." Later that evening, Ethan returned to the study in his apartment. The envelope Claire had left behind rested inside the top drawer of his desk. He had carried it with him every day since the opening ceremony. But he hadn't opened it. Not because he was afraid, because he wanted to read it only when he felt truly ready. Tonight felt different. He carefully broke the seal. Inside was a single handwritten letter. Claire's familiar handwriting immediately brought tears to his eyes. "My dearest Ethan, if you're reading this, then something wonderful has happened. It means the place we dreamed about no longer belongs to us. It belongs to the children. If that's true, then I already know something else. You smiled again, maybe not every day, maybe not without missing me, but you smiled, and that's all I ever wanted for you. Please don't spend another year wondering whether loving someone again would mean loving me less. Love doesn't divide, it grows. If your heart has found someone who brings you peace, don't turn away because of guilt. Give them the kindness you once gave me. Laugh again, build again. Live fully. I'll never be behind you asking you to stay in the past. I'll always be ahead of you, hoping you'll keep walking. Thank you for every beautiful day we shared. Now go discover the beautiful days still waiting for you. Forever proud of you. Claire. Ethan lowered the letter. He closed his eyes as quiet tears rolled down his face. For years he had searched for permission to move forward. Claire had written it long before he knew he would need it. The next morning, Ethan asked Maya to meet him in the reading garden before the center opened. The benches were still damp from the early morning dew. Birds sang softly from the maple tree overhead. Maya arrived carrying 2 cups of coffee. I guessed this was important. Ethan accepted one with a grateful smile. It is. He handed her Claire's letter. I want you to read it. Maya looked at him uncertainly. Are you sure? I've never been more sure of anything. She read slowly. When she reached the final line, she folded the letter with great care. I wish I could have known her. Ethan smiled gently. I think you do know her. He looked around the garden. She's in every corner of this place. Maya nodded. And in you. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence felt comfortable. Peaceful. Finally, Ethan broke it. I spent years believing my life had ended. He looked into Maya's eyes. You showed me it was still unfolding. She smiled, her eyes glistening. You found your own way, Ethan. You just let me walk beside you. Well, just then, Caleb came running through the garden carrying a notebook. Mr. Carter. He stopped, slightly out of breath. I got accepted into the Young Writers Summer Program. Ethan laughed with genuine delight. That's incredible. Caleb handed him the acceptance letter. I wanted you to be the first person outside my family to know. Ethan looked at Maya, then back at Caleb. This is exactly why we built this place. Caleb grinned. When I publish my first book, he pointed toward the library. I'm donating the first copy here. Ethan smiled. We'll save a special place for it. As Caleb ran back inside, Ethan looked around the garden once more. Claire's dream had already begun creating dreams of its own. And that, he realized, was the greatest legacy anyone could leave. Summer arrived quietly. The Claire Carter Community Learning Center had become one of the busiest places in the city. Children hurried through its doors every morning. Parents attended evening literacy classes. Retired teachers volunteered several days each week. The reading garden was almost always full. Some came to study, some came to read. Others simply came because it felt like home. Ethan often walked through the building without announcing himself. He loved watching moments no one expected him to see. A teenager helping a younger student with homework. A grandmother reading fairy tales to her granddaughter. Neighbors who had once been strangers sharing coffee after book club meetings. Claire's dream had become something larger than either of them had ever imagined. It had become part of the community's heartbeat. One afternoon, Ethan found Caleb sitting beneath the maple tree. The notebook that had once held his first short story had grown much thicker. You've been writing a lot, Ethan said. Caleb smiled. I finished my first novel. Ethan raised his eyebrows. Already? Caleb laughed. It's not very long. It doesn't have to be. The boy looked toward the learning center. I used to think stories were just something people read. He paused. Now I think stories help people become brave. Ethan smiled. I couldn't agree more. Caleb handed him the manuscript. I dedicated it to someone. Ethan opened the first page. The dedication read, For everyone who opened a door so someone else could dream. Ethan closed the manuscript gently. That's the most important dedication I've ever read. Later that evening, the foundation hosted its annual community celebration. Music filled the courtyard. Children performed songs they had learned during summer workshops. Families shared homemade meals at long wooden tables, decorated with wildflowers from the reading garden. The center no longer looked like a restored building. It looked like a neighborhood gathered around hope. Margaret approached Ethan with a folder. You'll want to see these. Inside were reports from schools across the city. Library memberships had increased. Child literacy rates in the surrounding neighborhoods were improving. Volunteer registrations had doubled. Scholarship applications had reached record numbers. Ethan smiled quietly. Claire's vision wasn't changing one building. It was changing lives. Richard joined them, carrying a glass of lemonade. I've spent 40 years serving on non-profit boards. He looked around the celebration. I've never seen statistics smile before. They all laughed. Margaret closed the folder. Tonight they do. As sunset painted the sky with shades of gold and crimson, Samuel found Ethan standing beneath the maple tree. I've been looking for you. Ethan smiled. You usually find me here. Samuel looked toward the children playing nearby. I wanted to tell you something. Ethan waited. The day Claire gave me those notebooks. Samuel began softly. She said she wasn't afraid of dying. Ethan looked at him in surprise. She was afraid only of one thing. That people might remember her, instead of continuing the work. Samuel smiled. I think she'd be at peace today. Ethan looked around the center. No one comes here because of her name. They come because of what her love inspired. Samuel nodded. Exactly. As darkness settled over the city, the celebration slowly came to an end. Volunteers folded tables. Children hugged their teachers goodbye. The lights inside the learning center remained on, casting a warm glow through every window. Ethan and Maya stood together near the entrance. Neither spoke for a long moment. Finally, Maya broke the silence. Remember the first day we met? Ethan smiled. A little girl's paintings were scattered across the sidewalk. And you looked like a man carrying the whole world. He laughed softly. I probably was. She looked toward the illuminated building. You don't anymore. He turned to her. No. I learned something. What? Grief never asked me to stop living. It only asked me never to stop loving. Maya's eyes filled with quiet emotion. And now? Ethan reached gently for her hand. This time, she took it. Now I know the heart has room to honor yesterday. He looked toward the bronze bench that carried Claire's favorite words. While still welcoming tomorrow, Maya smiled. Together, they walked slowly through the reading garden, past the maple tree, and toward the center's front doors. Before stepping inside, Ethan paused one final time. He looked up at the sign above the entrance. Claire Carter, Community Learning Center. He smiled. Thank you, he whispered. Not goodbye, just thank you. Then, hand in hand with Maya, he stepped into the light. Because love had never asked him to choose between the woman he had lost and the life that was still waiting for him. It had simply asked him to keep his heart open. And, at last, he had. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to let us know in the comments. What was your favorite moment in Ethan's journey? From grieving the love he lost to finding the courage to love again. If you believe that love never truly ends, but instead teaches us how to live more fully, give this video a like and share it with someone who needs a little hope today. And if you're new to Love Stories by Mr. Johnson, don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another unforgettable story filled with love, heartbreak, healing, and second chances. Thank you for spending this journey with us. Until our next story, remember, the greatest love isn't the one that keeps us in the past. It's the one that gives us the strength to embrace the future. See you in the next story.